So the
Of course.
incentives are so strong for you to submit that
It's
why
the
would
carrot and
you?
stick. Right.
Yeah,
Plot
exactly.
diploma.
It's like,
Silver
well,
lead. Yeah.
you'd have to pay property tax. Yeah, you'd have to pay property tax, and
Mm-hmm.
you'd have to help. You'd have to pay more because you didn't get a
Mm-hmm.
housing allowance. Yep, you'd have to do that more
Right.
too. Oh well,
Well, and
then.
I'm experiencing this firsthand. We were just talking again about it yesterday. That in 5 years, the top of the hill there'll be 52 houses.
Mm-hmm.
Within the next 10 years, all the farmland north of me will be houses.
Yeah.
We're going to be swallowed up by progress, whether we want to or not. And it doesn't matter that we're not incorporated.
Ah,
We'll
but
just
you're
be
perfectly
surrounded.
placed. The Lord put you there for that moment.
Correct. And
I mean, I laugh, but it's true, right? It's
it
like,
is. And so it's plata y pluma. It's lead or silver, as they used to say in the cartels in Colombia.
what?
And
I don't know this statement. What is this?
you can either take silver or lead, meaning you can either pay it off, you can be shot.
Oh, yeah.
Silver or lead. Those are your choices.
Well, and you can say
And,
that's progress, but it's also
Mhm.
progress within a dying world. So
Correct.
in the end, it's all going to be death and destruction and fire and
Right. Well,
decay
again, that's
and
the
rust.
subtext of 1883. It's not even the subtext. It's the fact that, as Elsa says, it doesn't matter how much you love the land will never love you.
Let it go. Let it go. Oh, that's a different. Also,
No, that's
sorry.
different. And yeah, you only really have two choices. Then is
Yeah.
you either accept the convenience that they're selling you now, or you're forced to do it later. But you don't have a choice.
Well, I
And
was
that's
thinking
that's what Kingsnorth constantly wrestles with. He did that whole series on the machine that I love.
Yeah.
He has another one called The Machine and the Cross, where he, as a convert, he re-engages the conversation that he wrote about before he was a convert. It's one thing to be an environmentalist and argue that the environmental movement where he's at, for example, in Britain, and obviously in the United States, but in Western society as a whole, the environmental movement has become the machine. It's a part of the machine.
Yeah.
And then lie to itself about its motives and its intent by attempting to buy our way out of and technologize our way out of the climate crisis and so on. But then as a Christian, he's saying, okay, now that I'm a Christian, I've actually discovered real environmentalism, like real
Yeah.
conservation, biblical conservation.
Right.
It's worse than I thought, because my environmentalist friends think that we can technologize our way out of this, and my Christian friends seem to care at all.
But that's how we ended up with microplastics and fluoride
Correct.
and
Right.
yeah, you go down the
Right.
list. That was all technology to supposedly make our life more pure and better.
Correct. And so this morning, I wrote about trees and conservation.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, I think, is that if yesterday I wrote a post about neoliberal capitalist democracies, and everyone's like, yeah, good post. Good, thoughtful. I write about trees and people are like, ugh, what are you writing about trees for? I'm like, you don't understand how they're related to each other? We've gotten to the point where we're so removed from creation, we're so removed from the earth, so dehumanized actually, that anybody who says anything about conservation, just simple basic conservation that you and I learned about growing up in school, you're considered a hippie. You're considered a liberal actually. And it's like, but don't you want your children
Actually, a
and grandchildren to
radical
inherit?
right wing. I mean, it's flipped. I think it's gone the other way.
That's true. Yeah, I did see a list last
Like
week
with the
or something.
homesteading and the
Yeah.
the prep and off grid, and that's all
Yeah.
that's the right
Yeah.
ultra right wing because they're going to have their militias and they're going to come take over or something.
And I think then that's with the avian flu nonsense. The avian flu just sprang up simultaneously everywhere in everyone's backyard who has chickens. Weird.
Yeah.
And all the chicken barns.
Do you know
are
how
burning
how
down.
many birds were culled last year? No,
No, how many?
actually this year so far,
Couple
close to
million,
100 million
Yeah.
in the U.S. 100 million birds.
And nobody cares because.
Well,
it
all they had to
happens.
do was give them hydrogen peroxide for 2 days, and it would have cleared it
Yeah.
out.
There is that.
I mean, there's a simple treatment that all the bird gut people know.
I interact with people who actually believe that having chickens in your backyard is. Well, I actually have people that believe drinking raw milk gives you tuberculosis. I didn't know about that till this month.
You get TB from
I
raw
didn't even
milk? No wonder
No.
I'm so sick all the time.
I know, right?
Look at me. I can
But-
never show up to work.
I was told this in earnest, and I thought we were joking. Turns out we weren't. And then I went and checked out comment threads on Instagram, and
Oh, yeah.
it turns out this is a thing that people are being told that raw milk can give you tuberculosis.
Well, and it is kind of counterintuitive because at the same time you have all the health nuts talking about gut flora, but then you're like,
Yeah.
but you can't eat the things that have the gut flora that have the flora in it.
Yeah, right.
Well, then how am I going to get the gut flora if I don't get to eat the things
Right.
with the flora because they've been pasteurized away? I'm a little
It's
confused.
got electrolytes in it.
It's got electrolytes. Thank you.
But it is that, like I said, you have a cultural shift where we're so removed from the earth that people like I said, in earnest, people will say that raw milk can give you TB, and if you have chicken in your backyard, you're spreading disease. Not without a hint of, like, for literally since the beginning of creation, we've done this. This has been the case.
Well,
forever.
but mortality is,
Yeah.
yeah, but mortality.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to King's North's little bit though, I was thinking about this because he was talking about trying to like not pay attention to politics, but then he's like, but this election's going to be really interesting, and you're like, well, okay.
You got to be on Substack, man. That's where all the
Well, he
action's
even
at.
kind of bemoaned that, right? It's like all the people
Well, it's
writing on
turning into
Substack.
Twitter.
Why? Yeah, exactly.
Twitter's
It's just
changed so that it's more interactive, and it's not.
well, you
just
always
a-
have to. You always have to. I do this with podcasts. You have to.
Mhm.
What do you want to say? Curate it.
Mhm.
And you'd be like,
Yeah.
you know what? I'm just not going to listen to this one anymore because it's not memorable. It doesn't contribute anything practical for my life and ministry. And
Correct. Right.
And I'm not a better person for listening to it.
Right. Exactly.
It doesn't
I think
actually
that's at the
change.
root.
It doesn't change anything. It doesn't move the ball or anything. It was that way with like most of the political shows. I don't even like even Dave Smith or something. It's like
Mhm.
now that I kind of understand it, I actually just go read the original people instead of just listening to Dave, regurgitate,
Yeah. Right.
Mises or somebody.
Mhm.
Just go read
Mhm.
Spooner or something. You're like, wow, this is even better,
Right. Or just
Uh,
listen to Malice, mock them.
Well, you could do that. But even Malice, I mean, it's like Malice intentionally doesn't want to actually change anything. I mean, he does. He wants to change everything and nothing at all at once. That's the
Right.
absurdity
We
of
can't.
it. Right, and that's what I think that's what King's North was kind of dancing around, is that
Yes.
there's nothing beneficial to it. It's not actually improving people's lives. It's not changing, and that to like our whole little congregational dispute, which I don't want to go into here, but it's like, well, how is this actually going to help anything? It actually doesn't help anything. If anything, it might contribute
It
negatively.
doesn't. I think I was reflecting on this 2 or 3 days ago about when we were young and charity concerts were popular, right? And even
Yeah.
going back to like the concert for Bangladesh that George Harrison and
right,
others
yeah.
put together, which
Farm
I think
Aid
really
and,
was
all
the
of those,
first,
yeah.
the first like real major fundraising concert. I think was the one for Bangladesh, or at least was one of the first to really.
When did
do
the
that.
Tibet ones come along? That was in the 90s?
Those were
or-
later. Those
Yeah.
were the 90s.
Farm Aid was
Beastie
80s.
Boys.
Right.
Farm Aid started in 83, 84, something like
Yeah.
that, 82.
Well, because you had Queen and whatever.
Willie
did the Farm
Nelson.
Aid shows. Willie Nelson.
Willie Nelson, John Cougar Mellencamp. The
It
people.
was
that you
originally
would
kind of
expect.
country or
Yeah.
rural people, but yeah.
But when those started, except for the Geldof stuff, which is another conversation, which really opened the door for what came later. But Aid, to this day, actually, it's still run so that a majority of the money that comes in goes to actual
Okay.
farmers.
All right, I
Right.
didn't know that. All right.
And that was the original constitution of those concerts was at least 70 to 80% of the money we bring in is going to go directly to the people that need it. It's not going to go for administration. It's not going to our pots. It was a hopeful, optimistic thing. But then by the time you do get to the 90s and the Beastie Boys doing the Tibetan, organized the Tibetan stuff, it starts to get a little bit of creep because now all of a sudden you have people capitalizing on it, which is true of anything.
Well, buy the
Then
merch,
by the
right?
And
Yeah.
by the 2000s, it was completely corrupted and had become a cynical enterprise. So that now, we turn remember in 2020, when they had this online, concert for the world, and
Oh, yeah.
a couple million people watched it. It was a tremendous flip. Because they never actually even said where the money was going to. They just said, we're going to use the money for causes.
Yeah, that
It
was
like, which one?
That was in the midst of COVID, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And we become so cynical and jaded, globally even, but especially in Western civilization, that we no longer have any faith in. Okay, I'll say this: there's a group of people that have no faith in outsourcing charity, And then there's an entire group of people that have no problem outsourcing to the state,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and because I encounter this all the time too, is people saying, well, we got to help these people. Like, you should help those people, but I don't live there and I don't care. I just take care of my people. Oh, then you don't care about people. You don't care about the poor. Like, no, about the poor in my community. That's why I take care of them. Do you?
Right.
The answer is
Right.
always no. Well, I don't have time. I work too much. What can I do? Versus, well, you could feed them. You could house them. You could, there's all kinds of things you can do. You just don't want to because
Right.
you don't really care. But it's a part of the culture you're in that you have to be concerned for people that are downtrodden versus, well, you could uplift them by simply going and taking care of them, but you don't want to
Right.
because that would take
Right.
too much. Whereas, again, it's not virtue signaling. It's just do something. Because even if you do something like take someone a meal, that's better than outsourcing the meals to the government and letting them do whatever they want and feed them whatever the government feeds them, which is always terrible. And
Well,
we've gotten
yeah,
to
and
the
that's
point
what
now.
I've had that with congregations that I've been a part of before,
Yeah.
where it's like, well, now we're going to get the USDA money so that we
Yeah.
can offer these free meals, and you're like, but I wouldn't eat this,
Correct.
so why
That's
would I
prison
feed
food.
it to my
Yeah.
neighbor? Yeah, it's prison food, like,
Yeah.
and it doesn't. So anytime you, well, because it just gets disconnected from it actually being charity. It just ends up being performative.
There's no humanity in it anymore. It's
Mhm.
dehuman.
Right.
Right. You've stripped it of humanity by saying somebody else will take care of this for me. And
Or it's everybody's
is what-
problem, which is another way to do that, I think.
sure.
Yeah.
But if you go back again to like we were talking about, if you go back to 1883 and you look around and say, who's going to take care of this? Well, you are, or they're going to take all your stuff and you're going to die out here.
Right. Right.
And then a group of people get together and say, well, we're helpless. We don't know how to defend ourselves. One of the things that's interesting about that show is this group of Germans then that are on this wagon train. Throughout the show, they're being asked questions like, well, you don't know how to swim. It's like, well, we're not allowed to swim where we come from. It's against the law to swim. You can actually be hung for swimming in the rivers. Well, we're not allowed to have firearms.
What?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Well, because it's not your river and you're not allowed to swim in it.
Oh yeah, like we were talking about, it's not your church, so you just count on
And
the.
they don't know how
whoever
to
to take
use,
care
they
of
don't
it.
have guns. They don't have guns because they're not allowed to have guns. So they don't know how to fire a weapon. They don't even think to buy a weapon. And so you're constantly being reminded that, yeah, like I said before, these people are destitute. And the reason they left Germany to come here and risk everything is, as the one man says, the one German man, the only thing we're allowed to do in Germany is pay taxes. That's the only thing that's legal.
Wow,
And you're like, that strikes a nerve.
that's
And
dark. That's dark.
yeah, but you realize that it's so bad that you're willing to cross a continent and an ocean and then come to a place that you don't even speak the language and then go into hell itself just on the thin possibility that life could be better. And even then the question is, well, who's going to protect us when we make this? We're pioneers now. So who's to protect us along the way? Well, we'll pay these two Pinkerton detectives, or we'll pay these cowboys to do that. And then when they get to where they're going, they say, hey, could you stay and be the law? Because it's just practical, right? We need someone to protect us, and you've done it so far. So now you have a sheriff. Now you have law. Well, now there needs to be laws. And as was said in the episode last night, the more people you put together, the more rules there will be. And there will be more laws, and the more traditions, and the more ceremonies. That's what happens when you have
Yeah,
more and more
necessarily
people.
the melting pot, right,
Which
as
is-
they call it.
Which is
Yeah.
why you stay away from cities.
That's why you stay in
um,
your tribes. That's right, with people like you.
100%. And then if you encounter the Comanches, and they're not too happy about the situation, and then you encounter the Lakota, Dakota, and others, and the Crow, and they're not too happy about their situation because they're saying like we didn't vote for this stuff. So I
But,
said
um,
to Ann,
But there's
I
even
said to
like
Annie, I'm
ancestral.
we could learn a lot, by the way, from the indigenous peoples. A
Yeah.
lot. It's happening to us now, and they're just like, hey, we're right here. How about reparations for us? Anybody want to talk about us? And you're like, yeah. How come we don't talk about reparations for the Crow?
Yeah. Well, and I was just thinking about how I can be around people that have the same, outward appearances and even
Yeah.
economic status, but it
Yeah.
is different when you're around people who have the same ancestry, and it's hard to
Correct.
kind of put your finger on it. It's like, well, what
Mhm.
is it? What is it? A common memory that you all share? But I
Dude,
remember, like when
I'm
we came
Irish
here,
in the LCMS. Do you know how many times people have said to me, I can't believe that you're Irish and you're in the LCMS. And I'm like, really?
Mhm.
We're still there? We're still talking that way?
Well, it's not.
No, it's a
Yeah,
total cultural identity and
yeah.
cultural history.
Yeah, it's there, even if it's unspoken. To the
Yeah,
point where I come
it's
here and it's like I actually have a relative that served as a pastor in this community. So,
mm-hmm.
like, but that's 5 generations ago. But
Yeah,
still, it's still like there. It's like I'm like, this is home. These are my people. And
yeah,
you're like,
yeah,
but I'm separated by 100 years. It doesn't matter.
yeah.
You just can't escape it, even though you never have lived there before. It's an odd feeling. It's an odd perception, but
It is, and of course we have to purge that from our society. We have to flatten society so that we're all the same. But
yeah.
really, what they're
But
saying is
why?
here's a new
Why?
culture, here's new rules, here's new ceremonies and traditions, here's new. It's all good for you. And the people that falsely read Romans 13 just accept it. They're the early adopters. They're the statists.
Well, historically we're a conservative church, meaning we're not early adopters of anything. Um, and so we're not first movers generally. And I don't know if that's a lack of courage or if it's actually just like, no, we want to just be
What
cautious.
you noted it is we're getting assumed into the machine again because
Mm-hmm.
the Methodists, the Baptists, the Anglicans, the ELCA, the Roman Catholics, they're all shifting. They've all shifted culturally in one direction.
Yeah.
And our people live in those communities. They live in our neighborhood, and they come into church with that. And so the church just assumed into the culture because, again, either we adopt it in the late 90s or you get forced to.
But it's weird because the people who come into the church, they're fleeing that. They don't like it. They don't want it. But then they cannot
No,
but
they're
bring
not.
it with them.
They're not. They can't. They're not capable.
They're not capable of making that distinction.
Right.
Well,
They're
and
pitiful.
I'm like, well, at what point does the church just say, you know what, we're just going to be the weirdos. We're going to be the ones that don't.
Let's use an example. So
Yeah.
let's say you flee Germany in 1882. You flee
Okay.
it because you don't have any freedoms. You don't like it. You want to leave. So you just meet with another group of people, all these different people from Germany, from different parts of Germany. You're from Berlin. They're from Erfurt. You're from Frankfurt. You're from Tübingen. Well, we're all going west, so we're going west together. We're all on the same ship. So we're in this together. At least we speak German, right? At least we have some cultural connectivity, right?
I said we can tell where we came from. Yes.
So you leave a place where you're helpless and you're pitiful, and the state is determining everything for you. This is your religion. This is where you're going to live. This is what you're going to do. So you're going to come to the new world, and then once you get here, you're still pitiful. You still have a slave's mentality. This is Israel in the desert. Israel never stops being Egyptian until they all die, and the next generation walks into Canaan.
It's
They
such a
never stop
subtle.
for 40.
It's such a subtle note for Moses, and Joshua.
Right.
Like,
But I'm just saying, 40
But it's there.
years in the wilderness, they're still Egyptians. They're not Israelites. They're Egyptians who God calls Israel, right? But they still identify as Egyptians. We see this because of the way in which they behave. Their traditions, their ceremonies, their rules, and their laws are all
and the
very
golden calf
Egyptian.
is a great
And
example.
it's very Egyptian. The
Very
Germans
Egyptian.
are very German when they get here, and they remain German after they get to Texas. So they have to find Americans who have been through some really hard times, like the Civil War, to protect them, because they don't know the rules, and they don't. Once they get here, they don't cease being German. Don't cease being pitiful. They continue to be pitiful, and they pay other people to protect them.
Yeah.
And then eventually their children's children become American and assumed into the culture. And the expectation that the Germans are going to change once they get here and become pioneers and assume being pioneers
Right.
is the frustrating part of the people that are leading the wagon trains, both fictionally but also historically. You read the diaries, you read the accounts of the people that led wagon trains, and it's like, yeah, 80% of you are going to die out here because you just can't accept that you're pioneers now. Can't bring your wood stove on your wagon. You got to leave your tube behind. You can't live the way that you lived back home. You have to change now. They can't because they're slaves.
Right.
Jump forward to the present tense. 80% of the people are going to die because they remain slaves and they can't change. And now we're being told, you don't need anyone to protect you along the way. We'll protect you.
Right.
And the people then that are capable, again, this is the problem with the whole thing about the draft is so funny to me, that no one recognizes that we want to naturalize all these illegal immigrants and simultaneously reinstitute a draft. Like, you don't see the shell game that they're playing right now. They know that most of the young men in America aren't fit for military service. not going to rebel against the government,
Well,
so they don't
and
need
the
to be sent
incentive
overseas
and the
to
incentive
die.
structures have already been attached to it. It's like basically
Correct.
you're going to get, I mean, with the GI Bill, you're going to get everything
Yeah.
and more.
Right.
You know, by
Again,
by
as my friend
enlisting.
Andy said, the purpose of wars is for the United States government to send every able-bodied man that can rebel against the government overseas to die. So there's no men left to rebel against the government at home. We don't have to worry about that anymore.
It's old Pharaoh, right? Killing all the baby boys.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we don't have to worry about that anymore because young men in America, young American boys, are not going to rebel against the state. They're no threat to the state.
So we
But
don't
who
need
is
to
going to
enlist
rebel
them.
against the state? But you know who's going to rebel against the state?
Yeah.
All the devout Muslims that come from other countries. All the
Yeah.
people who came here from their countries saying we're going to make a better life for ourselves. We're going to fight to make a better life. And by the way, we're not LGBTQ adjacent. We're not down with Pride Month. We don't care about your trans agenda. We're not down with any of that. That's against our culture.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna
we
get
don't
rid of
care
those
about
young
your
men.
phony baloney war either.
Correct. So we're
Mm-hmm.
going to send those men overseas with the promise of citizenship, full benefits, all that. And then they die out there. We can then assume their families into our culture very easily now because there's no one to fight. Right? And those that
Mm-hmm.
remain will turn against the old culture. This is the thing, right? You always have to turn the youth against the other. It's the color revolution in China, right?
Sure.
The Bolshevik revolution.
Colors. That's
And-
CIA. Sorry. Don't confuse Bolsheviks and CIA.
Sorry. Well, I mean, you know, you got to learn from somebody, right? You need a mentor. So it's all set up, and then going back to the local, and then what we'll do is we'll subsidize these multinational corporations to send in developers to buy up all the farmland and all the like. They're building a development on a slough, not next to it now, but right on top of it. It's called the Preserve. It's right down the road from me. It's absurd. Like they're building the back of the house is on the water. It's like that's not a lake. That's a slough. That's what all the cattails are. And so they're destroying all of our wetlands in the name of development and calling them.
No, they didn't.
lakes.
It's right. It's right, just right next to the wetland. It's not destroying
Right.
it.
It's out your back, like one step and you're in the water. So we're losing all of our wetlands. They're taking and building on top and paving over all of our soil. And again, what it does is it removes everyone from the land so that they are dependent on the state. And they kill chickens, they kill the people who sell raw milk, and they kill the dairy farmers, and they kill the ranchers. So that means there's no butchers, there's no processors, there's no co-op, there's no place to take your dairy. None of that exists. And again, like in Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, we're now going to start. You can't use water for your fields because global warming, climate crisis. Even
Right.
though there's plenty of water.
It was always about the water. It was always going to be about
Always
the water.
about water, all about the land, always. And if they can't, again, if you don't adopt our product, if you don't take and buy our product and be an early adopter, we'll just poison the well. That's what I'm saying. Like we did it to the Indians. They did it to the Indians. The U.S. government did it to the indigenous peoples. Now they're doing it to us. You know, it's ironic to me that we're not taught in school that it was the Democrats that were the racists that killed all the black people. It's
Well,
like, oh, that
whatever,
would've
and
been
whatever.
interesting.
I don't even know. I mean, the parties don't even correspond anymore, so it's just
No, they do.
titles
They
at this
flip flopped.
point. Yeah,
But I'm
there's all
just,
sorts of fun.
even if you don't want to make it about Democrat versus Republican, it was the politicians that killed you.
Right.
Wantonly,
I think
by
that's
the way.
that's more essential. Yeah.
That's my point. Is like, it was the politicians who sent the settlers out there to die at the hands of the Comanches and Apaches and said, we'll just throw millions of people at the problem until it's gone, and then we'll move in and take the land. Right? To the present tense. And they did the same thing by people after the Civil War and said, well, we'll just cull the herd. And so by the 1950s, black people had figured out, and the government went, oh, black people have figured this out and they're thriving. We need to destroy them. And then the 60s, 70s, and 80s was the federal government destroying black communities so that they are what they are today. And now they're doing it to us. It's the old thing, right? They came for the so-and-sos, then they came for the so-and-sos, and I said
Well, I know,
nothing.
I thought of that quote with the Kingsworth video because I'm like, well, okay, so you cannot resist or you could just ignore, but they'll still come for you then. I mean,
Right.
so
It's the thing I say about Beowulf all the time. You can either die fighting the monster, or you can just hide under the covers and wait for the monster to come in and eat you.
right, but I think maybe what he's getting after then, or what he's wrestling with, is that you don't fight them on the same, you can't fight them on the terms that they define. So, you know, you don't
Well,
fight
he
media
also
with more
recognizes
media.
now the spiritual war, though. Before his conversion, he would have. It's interesting. So he writes about environmentalism and the machine, and then around the time that he goes through his conversion, he realizes, oh, this isn't a material conflict. This is a spiritual conflict, but he has no like vocabulary, no lexicon to describe that. And then he converts, and now all of a sudden he has a spiritual lexicon. And so the last 3 years or so, now he's going back through, he's like Paul, he's going through this experience of like, I actually believe more strongly in environmentalism and conservation, but now I'm seeing in relation to God and the Logos and the work of the Spirit. So now I have to go revisit everything that I used to believe and convert that, translate that into the kingdom. Like in my last week, right, is when Christianity is too earthly, too horizontal, it's all about politics, culture, and fighting the culture wars. But
Right.
when it becomes too vertical, it's all about fasting and prayer and cloistering yourself, right?
Right.
This is why you and I were talking offline about the absolute failure of Lutherans of all Christians to not like fully grasp and have, front and center the two kingdoms.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't have that, and yet
Two
it's
kingdoms,
one of the
three
great
estates.
treasures. Right.
Yeah, when you put those two together,
It's
really
a pretty nice fortress to protect you from whatever comes.
well, and it's the unity with diversity, unity and
Correct.
diversity, right? It's also the hierarchy of value and not a
Correct.
value. That's wrong. Hierarchy of just a,
No, it's
the,
values, hierarchy of values. It's just that when they say hierarchy of values, they don't mean, again, consumerism, right?
right. Yeah, that's where I'm trying to avoid.
Yeah.
Right, and Luther had it well outlined. He had both the vertical and horizontal, and then within the vertical, the stacking of things. And
Right.
I mean, he had the conception there. Maybe because the medievals aren't as far from it. Maybe that's the reason why he can get
Correct.
to it so easily or readily.
Exactly. Well,
And we've-
going back to the point, right, is that Kingsnorth writes about this. You have holy trees, you have holy wells. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. And we don't have those anymore because we flattened reality. We're again, radical dogmatic materialists. And so you can't even have a conversation about the spiritual meaning of things. You can't have a conversation about, well, what's the meaning of this? What higher truth is God trying to teach us through this, right? And so I bring this up in Wednesday morning Bible class, and people that aren't a regular member of Bible class are completely befuddled by what I'm saying, because I'm using the example of feeding. Like I have a chipmunk. I have two chipmunks that come up on the deck and sit with me now, and they just eat. They just hang out, right? Anybody comes near the backyard, gone, right? There's meaning behind that. There's a higher truth behind. Something's happening there in that relationship between me and these creatures. And I use that because it's such a simple example. And I use it to kind of suss out the blindness that we suffer from, that we don't have a relationship to creation. We don't see ourselves as being in the creation, right? And therefore, where is God in creation? Well, I'm not in the creation, so I don't see God as present outside of Sunday morning worship. And even Christians get mad at me, obviously, for talking that way, confused by logos theology, which is weird if you read the early church fathers and the ecumenical councils. This is all pretty common back then. Again, up until the Middle Ages.
I mean, they had to walk to get to the council. So
there is that. They had time to think.
And you're in nature. That's the point. You're going to see nature.
But again, you go back and you read diaries and you read primary accounts of the settlers in the 1880s. They understood acutely where God was at. And it was not whimsical, right? It wasn't like,
right,
God?
Because if you try to oppose God, and as God's revealed in nature, he's going to crush you.
Right. Again, the number 2 killer of the pioneers was the river. Like that's as blunt as it gets.
But I think this is important because I was thinking about this. I was talking about it was in the Psalm we were reading this morning. And about the fear that you have for your father, right? And that's all over the place in the Bible, is that you fear God as a father, right? But you also fear earthly fathers. Well, why? And I think that's what we're losing. It's like we're not fearful of what
losing
what God could do to us, right? With the wrestling.
I don't think it's that at all, actually. I think we've got that completely wrong because we're looking at it again in a very late medieval.
We're actually trying. We are very fearful of losing. And so that's why we're fighting so hard against it.
What we do is we translate fear as punitive damage. Most people think
No,
of
I mean
fear
fear
God
as in like
punitive.
revere the river so that it, because it could kill you.
No, I'm saying in the sense of I don't want to lose my father
Oh, that's not what I was
because he's
thinking.
the head
I
of
was
the
going
house.
different.
He's the protector and defender of my house.
No,
This
that's
is
a
the way God
positive
describes
use.
himself.
But I'm just talking about what, that the wrath that could be meted out, if we rebel.
No, if
That's,
you if you just leave your father's house and wander away, you'll drown in a river. You'll go
Mhm.
squat in the bushes and get bit by a rattlesnake while you're doing your business. Like there's
Right.
consequences
Right.
for wandering away from your father.
Right.
We don't have that anymore because we actually tell our children from the moment they're born, you need to leave and go out in
Right.
the world and make your fortune.
Well,
Like
and this is
we,
what I was
we tell our
trying to
children to
suggest.
leave their father's house.
But one of the, I guess I was just trying to make a connection that it's evident in the way that it's man over nature, not
Correct.
in a dominion, not ruling
Mhm.
over nature, but like in a oppressive, like let's
And yeah, well, that's why so many people
overcome.
died in rivers because they didn't respect the fact that it can kill you.
You got to build
It
a
doesn't care
bridge,
about you.
or you got to ford the river, right? I mean,
You got to fjord it. You got to ride the horse. You got to figure out how to get a wagon across a
you
river.
got to wait. You got to wait until it dries up.
Yeah, and then you die because winter comes,
Yeah, that's true.
and you don't have enough food for winter. You die
Again, Oregon Trail,
That's-
a classic.
Yeah. if you didn't leave St. Louis before July 4th, you were going to die from winter. Like
Yeah,
that
that's
was the
true.
rule.
Yeah.
If you get to St. Louis after July 4th, don't go west. You're going to die in the mountains.
And you may just end
Donner
up
Party.
staying in Saxon County, Missouri, or
There you go.
Perry County,
Right.
Missouri, and hang out with the
That's
Saxons.
how a lot of
and-
people settle in certain places. They just make the cutoff. So they had to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like Adam says, the state is now the father. And the state says never leave your father's house. So
Well, I
what the
wouldn't even
state
say
has done is-
now. I mean, that's what they called Caesar. They called him the father of
Yeah, I know.
fathers.
well, that's what they called Pharaoh. Father of all
They call-
fathers, yeah.
yeah, and Pharaoh too. Yeah.
I bet you Nimrod actually was the one who said, well, I'm sure Cain actually was the first to insist on being called the father of fathers because he's the one who talks about revenge, or Lamech talks about that.
Oh yeah,
Revenge for
Lamech.
Cain.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be 10 times worse than my dad, grandfather.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
set for striking my father, I will avenge myself upon you 7 times, 77 times, he says. If you ever wonder where
goodness.
Jesus gets that from.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, the state's always wanted to be your heavenly father. And so the most rebellious thing you can do, the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply return to your father's house and say, I
Yeah.
wandered away.
Yeah.
But to the point I was saying to someone yesterday then, I was visiting a widow. As a parent, at least for us, we have striven as parents to raise our children in such a way that no matter where they go in their life, no matter how old they are, no matter what trouble they get into, they know we can go home.
Mhm.
That's anchorage, right? That's safe. Go have your adventures, go succeed, go fail, get in trouble, find love, whatever. But no matter what happens, you can always return. This will always be your anchorage, right? Your fortress. But we don't do that in the church,
Well,
especially
I mean,
because we run our churches like franchises.
some people don't. I always do. I just say welcome
Right.
home when they come back. But I don't know.
Well, and think about it this way. If you run your church as a franchise, what you have are relationships of utility,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
I go to my favorite restaurant regularly, not every week because I can't afford it. But whenever you go out, let's go back to that. We like that restaurant because we like what's on the menu. We like how they prepare the food. We like the service. But if that restaurant closed, I would just go to a different restaurant that's similar food, right?
You might lament
Well,
it for a
people-
while. Too bad that barbecue place is gone. you know?
Exactly. But you would move on. And that's the same way people feel about church. And that's being cynical. That's for you and I as pastors, we've experienced that
Oh, yeah.
countless
Oh, yeah.
times.
Yeah.
So if you said to your members, return to your father's house, one, they don't believe that the church is God's house, first of all. Two, because it's a franchise, it's a business. Two, then our church governance is so cockeyed that we actually have an ancient church polity mashed together with a modern corporatist understanding of business. And
Democratic,
I don't understand
right.
why our churches are upside down and backwards when it comes to worship and business.
It's majority rules. It's
pastors
not
are
even
essentially
representative
neutered.
government, right? Like
No,
our country.
Because for those of you who don't know, and this is on the live stream part, so you can cut this out, but pastors are largely neutered at seminary so that when they do take their call, they don't go in and say, well, this is wrong. We have to change this. They go in and say, how can I maintain the ship? How can I keep franchise going?
Well, right. Especially if it's your first call, because you because
especially.
that's a black mark,
Yeah.
and then you're just, I mean,
Right.
I know this personally. It's very hard to overcome that. People
Well,
don't trust
and
you.
I have a great district president now, but in the past, I've had district presidents who assumed that I was guilty until proven innocent if there were a
Hmm.
complaint.
Yep.
My pastor, or my district president, was a pastor for 20 plus years before becoming district president, so he understands the game. So if something happens, he calls me personally and says, "Hey, this is what I heard. Can I get your?" And then I tell him, and he listens, and we talk it out. And he's like, "Okay, I understand where you're coming from now."
Yeah.
And if there needs to be further conversation, then he personally comes, sits down with elders, and says, "Okay, now let me get your perspective," right? But it's not pastor's wrong, congregation right. And there's a subtext to that in a lot of districts in our church body then, because it has to do with property and land and money and number.
This is what nobody, well, maybe somebody remarked on this that I talked to, but why when we had a funeral for our district president, he died, and there's
Right, that's right. Yeah.
260 congregations, I think, in our district, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
There were 150 pastors there, and you had to ask the question,
That's still
why?
pretty good, actually, considering.
Yeah, why 100? I mean, he wasn't old; he
Yeah.
died in office, so
Yeah.
that's part of it. But like, why? And it's because of that he cared about the pastors as he cared about the congregations. They weren't like pitted against each other, and to the point where like somebody like me, I mean, he had a special attention to pastors who didn't have a congregation to serve, to make sure that if he could help place them, he did. Whereas that was not my experience with other districts.
Yeah.
And he was very attentive to that. And so like, I'll love him forever for that. Like, cause
Yeah.
that was huge for me,
Yeah.
to get on my feet again.
He was a pastor to pastors. Like he
exactly.
actually pastored. Yeah.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I don't want to say, a majority of 100% of congregations that I have visited, spoken at, or been engaged by to act as counsel, have suffered from, as a church, we're a franchise, we're a brand. How do we sell ourselves and maintain our livelihood? And then in some instances, we're for the pastor and we're asking the question. In other instances, we're against the pastor and we're asking the question. But there is this.
But you can never be.
tension.
You can never be like. Well, the franchise is actually the problem.
Right. The franchise is. It's not you. It's how you're thinking about this. That church polity shouldn't be run like a business. And like you said, if you embrace the weird, what has been currently happening in my congregation, as an example, is that it's the law of thirds again. A third will get frustrated and essentially check out. A third will just continue doing what they've always done and just be like, "Nah, that's just what pastor does." And again, it's what pastor does. And then a third are excited and like, "No, this is great," right? And I could go off deep end and go completely super Baptist decision theology. Same thing would happen.
You
I
would
can go
always
super-
so to that point then with the rule of thirds,
Yeah.
you can always get a 2/3 majority, no matter what.
Correct. Yeah.
Because there's always a third in the middle, and you're just going to pick the other third,
Right.
and then it's just like, but it's just partisan then as well.
Yes.
which is kind of
Right.
gross. It's like you have these
Because
factions:
they bring culture in with them. They can't not. They're a part of it.
liberal, conservative,
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Most of the people, I would say in the LCMS, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the people that I encounter, and this is just me, they want to be theologically conservative. No, I'm sorry. They want to be culturally conservative and theologically moderate to liberal.
Yep, that's my experience too.
And then have a small fraction that are conservative theologically and culturally.
And of course, we would try to remind them that if their theology is not conservative, then their culture won't be either.
Right.
Because that's actually the stopgap. That's what actually
Right. It's an odd
prevents-
thing. It is an odd thing to say of two camps. Well, on the left hand, I'm kind of over here, and on the right hand, I'm kind of in the opposite direction. And it's like, what about?
Well,
is there?
I made this point on Twitter this morning. It was just kind of, I don't know. You don't have to agree with it, but I was just thinking about it because somebody said, "Well, there's secular and there's spiritual matters," and I was like, "Well, wait a minute. Who's the Lord of all and in all and through all?"
Yeah.
That would be
Right.
Jesus. So
Correct.
does His word
It's
apply
a false
to
dichotomy.
exactly? When you say secular matters, you're saying we want to decide these matters without God,
Correct.
without His word, apart from
Right.
His word. They're like, well, but
or
it's
in
money.
the name of
Like, well,
God, but without the name of
Jesus-
Jesus being involved.
There you go. There's
Yeah.
that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, this is
It's
the
like,
problem with logos theology, which I'm having a lot of fun with it because I'm a mischief maker. But
mm,
I love the fact that when we start talking about logos theology, other pastors wrinkle up their forehead and go, "What are you talking about?" Like,
I
logos
used
theology.
to, definitely. I like, there was people that would, and because I didn't know what they
Well,
were
I
talking
did too.
about.
That's why I get so much fun out of it. Because then when you get into it, you're like, "Oh, I've been missing the big picture." Okay, now I get it. Yeah, okay. Again, it goes back to the mysteries.
Well, maybe it's just the obscurity of the word logos, I think. Not scripturally, but
Well, it doesn't fit in between rationalism and romanticism. There's no
it
room
doesn't.
for it there.
Yeah,
And
yeah, it
this
doesn't
is
work.
our church, especially as a child of romanticism, pietism, rationalism, and 17th, 16th century orthodoxy.
Which are all, I
So it's
mean, in a
this,
sense, secular movements. They're trying to separate from God.
they're reacting against, yeah, exactly. They're
Hmm.
reacting against cultural movements. We're going to read Kierkegaard today, actually, who is strongly reacting against cultural Christianity in the church, of the state church,
Yeah.
and where he lives in
And I'm
Denmark.
sympathetic to the state church and all the criticisms of it.
Well,
That's not.
absolutely.
But then it's the reaction is the issue, right? It's not the criticism.
This is Pajot's point about revolutions.
Uh-huh.
Revolutions seek to burn things down. And
Right.
then after we burn everything down, we'll figure out what to do. Like, well, that's
And,
why
and
you end
and
up building the exact same thing. It's just sympathetic to you.
well, and Reformation is the harder road. There's no way around it, as our church body can attest to.
Right.
You
Right.
know, I like
Yeah.
conciliatory, like actually reconciling with brothers. Is the hardest
Hmm.
way. I mean, that's probably the narrow path. I mean,
What you do
it's
when they
easier
don't
just
want to, though.
right, exactly, right.
I'm saying. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well,
When
and that's where the
you,
separation happens.
yeah.
Yeah. And who's
And
going
it's
to
not
who's going to be
always
the first move?
satanic. It's not always
Well,
satanic.
yeah. So I
It's
was
God
dealing
saying
with
to
this,
Eli and his sons, you're not going to be priests in this temple
or
anymore.
or this example, right, where Paul says, "No, I don't want John Mark with me. I don't trust that guy anymore."
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
Barnabas
Yeah,
takes John
yeah,
Mark, and Paul's like
yeah.
Silas, and then he picks up Timothy along the way. And it's
My
like,
kids have
and it's
enjoyed
like,
us reading the pastoral epistles for that reason. They're like,
yeah, and Paul, it's like,
what's
Paul, you're
this
kind of a
about?
jerk, and it's like, well, no, he doesn't trust John Mark because he
Yeah.
ditched him, and you don't
Yeah.
find that out earlier. You just like John Mark left for Jerusalem, and you're like, well, I don't know
Yeah.
why, whatever. Then you find out
Yeah.
it's like, no, he's actually like he ditched him. But Barnabas
Yeah.
takes him up. So that was my point. It's like, okay, he can't be
Mhm.
with Paul anymore, but Barnabas can take him under his wing and care for him
Correct.
and raise him
Yeah.
up in the faith and
Mhm.
introduce him to the people he needs to be introduced to write his gospel
Mhm.
and all of that. That's
Right.
fine, right? And so it's like, but it's not perfect. You're like, oh, but everybody needs to get along with Paul. I think a lot of people didn't get along with Paul.
Yes, for sure.
People still don't get
Right.
along with Paul, especially the things he wrote. But anyway. But yeah, so there is a diversity there. Not every congregation is going to be right for everybody. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
You know, but then who's the one's going to be the mover? Who's going to be the say this is just not working out? Let's try something different. You know.
It's all work of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the point. Like you just said, I agree with everything you just said, but I also know that maybe 5, 7 years ago I wouldn't agree with you because,
mm,
well, but what about that over there? It's not your problem. But
no,
I'm seeing it. Still not your problem. Somebody else.
no,
That's the
leave him
Holy
alone.
Spirit.
Like Jesus said, yeah,
Correct.
leave him alone.
Yeah.
That's not your
Yeah.
problem. That's God's problem.
Hmm.
Yeah,
That's
That's hard.
That's what the internet has done, though. It's caused everything. And said
Commodity-
everything has to be
Yeah.
a part of your view. You know, you can't just look at the vista. You got to look at everything and see everything and have an opinion.
Well, like
about
we've talked
everything.
about, like okay, you can care about what Biden's doing or something, but it's like
Sure,
the likelihood that it's going to, I mean, it does affect you, of course, but in a very tangential
eventually,
way.
if not immediately. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's very tangential and it's very distant
Mhm.
and it's broad and it's affecting everybody kind of and equal and
Yeah,
or different
Pharaoh's
ways.
long live the Pharaoh.
Right, but
Caesar's dead.
but why aren't you paying attention to what your mayor did or what your council
Correct.
is doing?
Exactly.
Or
Yes. Right.
what your
there.
local
Yeah.
Congress or what your state house did
Mhm.
or what the
Right.
judge ruled in the county
Right.
seat. You know, if
Right.
you're going to be actively involved, because you could actually, you, as far as a percentage of the majority, you're much higher up. You know, so your
Sure.
voice actually might have some value there. You may actually, but of course,
Mhm.
now once you get involved, then they're probably going to capitalize on that and drag you into
That
it
too.
all, and maybe you
Right.
just don't want to be.
No, my
involved in it.
trustee's thinking about running for school board just so that he can understand what's happening at the school that his kids attend.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's eyes wide open as far as homeschooling. He's saying, like, no, we're still going to homeschool, but I want to see from that that perspective, from the other side of the table, what exactly are they doing with these kinds of choices for the school?
Right, exactly. And you could just go to school
Well,
board meetings. I mean, that's the first step. Is just show
sure.
up and just
Yeah.
when they have
Yeah.
when they open the floor, just talk.
I'm in Minnesota, so going to school
Yeah.
board meetings is weird because they have a lot of rules now. A
Well, you
lot.
can make it a drinking game. That might make it more entertaining. Um,
Yes. 10
every
minutes in, you're
time
just
anything woke
wild.
is mentioned, take a shot. By the time you're given opportunity to speak, it might be a
I
little
was going
bit
to say, just
slurred.
tell the Uber driver to just keep the engine running because you're not going to be long.
And maybe with escort. Um,
That's right, exactly.
no, I was thinking about this football team owner over in England, and there's two teams in the town that he lives in. And so he's been talking about this on his podcast about the way that he's been trying to start this football team, and it's not the mayor's favorite because the mayor actually is friends with the owner of the other team. So the mayor's actually putting all these blocks up and won't let him expand the stadium, won't let him do any kind of stuff. And he's like, I guess I just have to run for mayor. Like I just have to be the mayor because that's the only way that, and because there's other people like me. Like I can't, and he's trying to open a cafe. He can't open the cafe because all the regs. Like,
Yeah.
So I guess I just have to be the one in charge so that not only me, but others could actually, do these things that should be just permissible and relatively free to do. But anyway, and so I get that. That's civil action. Does it really benefit the neighbor? I don't know. I mean, it seems all kind of lower level stuff, but.
Before we get started, this just came up. I want to read it because we're talking about
Okay.
it. It's so great. This just in. Minnesota State Senator Mary Kunesh describes the activists and elected officials gathered at a pro-abortion press conference right now as an incredible coven of leaders, championing human rights for all. It was
Nice
organized
choice of
by
words.
Ilhan Omar.
Nice choice of words. Yeah, nice.
Yep. Organized by Ilhan.
Oh,
That's funny. I could have sworn that the Quran is very has very strong ideas about not killing children,
Uh-huh.
unless it's intifada.
Oh, are you saying she's not actually a Muslim?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, for sure. Like, she's about as much of a Muslim as Joe Biden is a Roman Catholic.
She's definitely Somali. She's definitely Somalian.
There. She's got that, and she is definitely a government, an agent for the Qatar government, as she has said out loud. No, I'm an agent for the Qatar government.
Did you see they killed the bill again?
Like,
every
wait,
once
you
in a while
just said that
somebody
out loud, and there's no consequences?
every once in a while somebody drops a bill, in the House to say, if you're dual citizen, you need to disclose that to the American citizens.
That's like all of them, isn't it? Most of the people in
well,
Congress.
What's something like 120 of the
Yeah.
it's something like 120. It's not a majority, but it's a big minority.
Massey dropping the receipts on Tucker.
Oh,
Everybody
right.
has
Well,
an
with the
AIPAC
Israel lobby. Yeah, exactly.
advisor, yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
what?
Well, the
Yeah.
dual citizen, that's the far and away the majority of them are Israeli double
Yes.
citizens. You're like,
Well,
well,
we're not allowed to talk about it. So to quote Voltaire,
to go Voltaire. What did Voltaire say?
if you want to who has power over you, find out who you're not allowed to criticize.
Oh, right. That's Voltaire? Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
I thought it was from a comic book. Yeah. Oh, well.
Yes, quoting Voltaire. Yes.
Nice.
Yeah. We don't want to get rounded up and swatted, so we'll be nice.
Should we read something?
Yeah. I got dots. We're going to read
Good.
some Kierkegaard today.
Me too. And we got a war chant. We can play that. See if everything's working this week. You hear it?
I can hear it this week.
All right,
There you
go.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the show. This is the Banned Books Podcast, episode number 357, where we're going to talk about fear and trembling. But before we do that, as always, we are your hosts, Christopher Gillespie.
Chilling and willing, maxing and relaxing in the morning. I thought it was, I kept wanting to type fear and loathing instead of fear and trembling.
I know. Yeah, right.
It's very
That would
hard.
have been even better if Kierkegaard had written Fear and Loathing, and then Thompson picks up on that and spins it. But alas, no. But I'm Donovan Riley, by the way, if you know that already.
Oh,
and
hi.
thank you to 1517 for the platform that we can have this conversation on. We're going to read Soren Kierkegaard, who in a way is the original Hunter S. Thompson of his generation. He's the OG
Yeah, in a
Hunter
lot
S.
of ways.
Thompson.
A lot of ways.
In a lot of ways, actually. You can go read about Kierkegaard's biography. He was a wild man.
a favorite of a lot of people, I think, because of the what is it? Is it a Gen X thing, like the existential crisis that?
Yeah,
that
he
we lived
owed
through?
existentialism. It's kind of the
Right.
progenitor of the existentialist movement.
Before you get too
And
far.
he loathed Hegel, which is why I like him.
Oh yeah, well then we love them.
Yeah.
We have 9 days, 12 hours, and 35 minutes left in the 1517 Podcast Network fundraiser, and currently we've raised, I guess for us, it's all raised,
Mhm.
it's all for us, $74,218. So that's with match. So there's a 1-to-1 match, and the goal is 150, so that we can I don't know, do more.
Have a pool party before Jesus comes back.
Epic pool party, a rager.
Happy
That's
pool
my-
party. I got my "Here We Still Stay" email from Lana this morning that I'm supposed to get my room straightened away. So
Oh,
that's
nice.
always a sign that the year
I
has
don't-
gone too fast.
I don't get to go anymore. That's too bad.
You can
I'll
go
be
in my
San Diego.
place. We could tag every other year. We should do-
I could just wear a tracksuit and be on Donovan Riley.
I was gonna say I'll write the manuscript and then you just stand up there and read it. It'd be fantastic.
In his absence. He's in absentia. Donovan
There
Riley.
used to be a Saturday Night Live thing. I am not Chevy Chase, or I am Chevy Chase. Hi, I'm
back
Chevy
in the
Chase.
classic days?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, as Jane
so-
Curtin revealed, most of those skits aren't funny. You just the ones that worked.
Oh, of course. Yeah. How many hit the cutting room floor during the week?
Yeah.
During the rehearsals? It's got to be. So if you go to 1517.org/donate-podcasts, so donate-podcasts, it takes you right to the fundraiser, and you can do a recurring gift, and you need to put in the note that you listen to our show and that we're the best show on the
Yes.
network, and that they should pay us more. So put that in there, and
Absolutely true.
everything will
On
go well.
every account. That's right. We are essentially
We would-
chained to the oars of this ship.
Make
I
a
want to
change
buy
in the
my
world.
freedom. That's right. Let me buy my freedom.
Okay. I think we kind of wrecked the whole promo there, but oh well.
That's what we do. We're the IT crowd. That's what we do.
The wrecking crew.
We are the wrecking crew. So yes, we're going to read Kierkegaard, Fear and Trembling. I would recommend reading Choose for Yourself or Judge for Yourself for examination. There we go. For self-examination. As I said, I used to read that every Lent as a palate cleanser because he excoriates the Christians of Denmark in the state church. In that, Fear and Trembling is great though because it's essentially a meditation on Abraham and his sacrifice of Isaac.
Yeah, we have only read one other Kierkegaard, I think, on the show.
We read his parables.
Yeah, which one was the sparrow and something, or I can't remember the name of them. Yeah, those parables.
Yeah. One about the swan or the stork.
That was 2 years
It was a
ago.
bird.
We had the summer series on with literature. We were doing.
That's
literature.
right. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, Dostoevsky's parables, Kierkegaard's parables.
So he's born to an affluent family, right?
We got to read Tolstoy next week. Speaking of lay.
Oh, there we go. We could do that.
There we go.
So he's not a PK. I kind of thought he might have been, but just wealthy family.
No, it's much worse.
Why? Because he was in Copenhagen?
No, his father was a raging pietist.
Oh.
Slash
not on Wiki-
bender,
that's not on
bender of
Wikipedia.
rules. Yeah.
Why
What?
didn't they put that on Wikipedia?
Yeah. His father was an oddball.
Okay.
Mhm.
So,
Kierkegaard
family
was raised by
history.
women.
Raised by women. Okay, so this can affect him. So he's a mama's boy, is what you're saying.
Mhm. Well, it was he was raised by like sisters, aunts, mother, and then there's a whole thing of the woman his father married, and Kierkegaard's problem with that. And then Kierkegaard was a jilted lover, even though he really tried to marry someone that was, I think she was his cousin. I
Oh,
think first cousin actually, first or second
awkward.
cousin.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
awkward.
but no, he essentially fell in love with someone he knew was attainable, and then tortured himself about it. He also had a hunchback, a clubfoot. And
So he's kind of like a walking Shakespeare story.
he really is.
This
As I've
experience.
said before, he used to, on Sunday mornings, he would sit at a cafe across the street from the church where he lived, and he would invite prostitutes to sit with him, and he would read the newspaper and drink outside, and then mock the aristocrats as they pulled up in their wagons to go into the church. Their carriages, sorry, not wagons, carriages to go into the church.
So how much of
and
that is,
then-
is that a what do we call that? That's like a performance art in a way.
Right. Yes.
You know?
Well, he was disgusted by the fact that the bishops were obviously more interested in maintaining their status as it related to the state and the crown than we were talking about this about they weren't pastoring pastors. These bishops, they were at they were the Pharisees. They were at the dinner parties and
Speaking of
wanted to be,
franchises, yeah, exactly.
yeah, they wanted to be seen out in public with the movers and shakers of the society.
With their
And
phylacteries.
Kierkegaard, and that's why he refused to go to church. And also in church, it was segregated because the wealthy got to sit in one section of the church, and the poor were made to sit up in the loft or in the back. Or
I've
stand
tried to
and
adopt
watch.
that. I've suggested it to people. Like you get little badges
Selling
you can put on the
pews?
pew. Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. Subscription
Absolutely.
model. It seems like
I'm
the church
saying.
could use that.
Daddy needs a retirement fund.
Well, no, not even for that. Just for like regular reoccurring income.
Right?
Whether you're in your pew or not, you paid for it. You know.
There we go. How would
This
that?
is what the synagogues do. So
Right.
So that's where I got the idea.
Yes. So no, it was a state church. It was wild in Kierkegaard's day, and he was disgusted by it. He was disgusted by the preaching. He would write. He had his own printing press, and he would write excoriating essays about bishops and name them. He would name them, and then have to print redactions apologizing because he would be threatened with all
So
sorts of lawsuits.
can we?
and
Is it
fines.
fair to call him a Christian? I mean, this is a question, right?
Who, Kierkegaard?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. He died demanding to be communed, just not by a bishop, and therefore they withheld the sacrament from him. He said, I want a lay person to commune me," and the bishop
So
said no.
So let's see. I don't know how late this is, but after like all of his like predominant works, including this one, so 1846 or 47, he said, "I'm just going to quit and I'm going to go be a parish or country pastor." So he actually,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, he didn't, but that was what he
was
intended to do.
he was vitriolic and meteoric emotionally. Let's put it that way. He was up and down.
Apparently, he wasn't
As I
well
said-
respected in Copenhagen. People thought of him as
No,
kind of like
no,
a
he
clown.
wasn't.
Huh? I'm reading all this
Yep.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that they would make jokes about him in the press.
Right.
And so he was the butt of jokes. And final collision was with the Church of Denmark, Lutheran,
Yeah.
and its leaders, the bishops Minster and Martensen. He in his journals, Kierkegaard called "Sickness unto Death" an attack upon Christendom.
Yeah.
That's what they were. The
Which
bishops.
is a book actually entitled "Attack on Christendom." That is one of his works.
Right, exactly. And then he posted short, shrill pieces insisting that what passed as Christianity in Denmark was counterfeit and making clear that these bishops were responsible for reducing religion to leniency, which is kind of ironic given his own life, right?
Well,
And
I always joke that he's kind of like a theological Tyrion Lannister. It's this weird mashup
That's a
of
good parallel.
characteristics.
that's a good
you know?
parallel. He's actually the most
Physically-
entertaining person in the entire show because he's the only one that takes anything seriously, even though he's the
Correct.
most unserious person.
But he's deformed, and so no one takes him seriously because of not only his deformation, but also the fact that the way in which he addresses people is mocking and sarcastic and
That's
and
true. He's
cynical.
actually the existentialist philosopher of the show, of the books.
Especially in the books, right?
Yeah, especially in the books. It's like all of
Yeah.
this is vanity. He's like Solomon. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all a
But
big
yeah,
joke.
I think that's why, at least in my experience, the reason that Christians are turned off by Kierkegaard, one, is because he's usually classified as a philosopher. When I worked at Barnes and Noble in seminary, his works were in the philosophy section. They weren't in the theological section. And then two, when you read him, he's hard to read because it is vitriolic.
Yeah.
And he is really hard-nosed, especially in a lot of, like I said, judge for yourself for self-examination, attack on Christendom. Like he's going hard in the paint. And if you don't understand his own biography and the Danish culture at that time, especially the church, it just sounds like he's really angry and he's ranting.
Well, and then if he's going to be engaging like in this one, with the philosophy of the day, I mean, this is a pretty heady time as far as philosophy goes, and a lot of that language is kind of lost to us. I mean, like Hegel, for
Right.
example, like the only thing I know about Hegel is the dialectic. But Hegel applied the dialectic not just to political, but to
Everything.
ethical. Yeah,
Yeah,
to
read his lectures
ethical
on
life.
history, for example.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And to history too. And there's probably, I think it's not that it's false. That's the problem.
Right.
It's just not the scheme to impose upon these things, but rather a description of what has been.
Right.
The push and pull,
Yeah.
the back and forth, we elect them and then we elect them and then we elect
Right.
them, and but
It's
the meanwhile everything is changing and it's moving towards one direction, and
he's doing a forensic examination of a body,
hmm
but not attending to the head. This
right.
is
So
the
it can't
Enlightenment
go
in a
in.
nutshell.
So you can't change course
Right.
because there's no direction. It's directionless.
Right.
It's actually like natural selection then in the
The
end.
subtext of a lot of Kierkegaard's writing, I don't want to say all because I think that's too monolithic, but the subtext for much of Kierkegaard's writing is he is responding to Hegel.
hmm
Much of what he writes is a response to Hegel. You don't need to know that to read Kierkegaard, appreciate him, but if you read Hegel, the phenomenology of the spirit, for example, and then read Kierkegaard, when he starts talking about the same topic, you can tell he's responding
I mean,
to Hegel.
Hegel is the guy.
Yeah, and he's also obviously responding to the dialectic because he has a text called Either Or. Like
Right,
he has an actual,
exactly.
You know,
Yeah,
where he's
yeah.
like almost directly responding to Hegel. But like you said, yeah, it's a really heady era. And think about it in the sense of the state church being a moralistic, therapeutic, deistic entity. And Kierkegaard saying, no, we need to push Christ. But we also need to push the God of Abraham,
Mm.
right? Takes this up in his Romans commentary. He deals with Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky in this sense, because Barth's responding to existentialism too, because he was a pastor and, you know, he's living with the consequences of existentialism.
So maybe we should describe what existentialism. I mean, this is
Go for it.
well, I don't know. I'm gonna guess. I mean, he's talking about.
What do you mean, guess? You're sitting in front of the internet.
Okay, fine. In the pseudo-anonymous works of Kierkegaard's first literary period, 3 stages of life's way, or 3 spheres of existence, are distinguished: the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. That's probably actually pretty good. So then he's talking about how these things are manifest in like experience, right?
The good,
aesthetic,
the
ethical.
beautiful, and the true.
Yeah, that'd be another way to say it. That's right.
Yeah.
Which are classic virtues, but here he's like saying this is the way to diagnose your life, basically,
Yeah.
and the lives of.
This is the
Well,
way.
you can't describe other people's lives. You're describing your own life. It's all it's
Correct.
introspective as well.
It's what is my standing in relation to the universe?
Right.
Yeah.
So both the way I live, what I believe, and then how I appear actually
Right.
in my acts.
Well, good example, Dietrich Bonhoeffer's "Who Am I?" that so many people love to quote and post on social media. Who am I?
Yeah.
Not who are
And,
we? Not who am I
right.
in relation to Christ? Just who am I?
The aesthetic is interesting. I mean, because that seems to be all that we're concerned about today, not the ethical and the religious. It's like, how do I appear on Instagram, right? And it's also it's like arts and, but it's very much the creaturely life, I guess, is what you would say, not the
The body, not the head.
It's about the body, right?
Yeah.
Right. And that so, he might be helpful then to think. Well, you need to
Right.
think a little bit more broadly about.
Right.
Who you are. But the problem is, you start looking introspective, what's going to happen, right? Theologically.
Okay.
You
Well,
become
think of it this way
self-obsessed.
too, to go back to what we've been talking about. So with Christ as the head, we have unity and multiplicity because we're one body under our chief, our chef, who is Christ. And the brain then that operates the body is Christ. So anything that the body does, the multiplicity of parts that make the body what it is, it's all kept in order by the head, who is Christ. Take the head off, and now you have a multiplicity looking for unity, which is what equity politics is.
Right.
But there's no head, there's no brain. This is why culturally we're in such a fluid place right now, in such an ambiguous and confusing time, because we hear constant calls for equality, equity, that the outcome and opportunity should be equitable, but there's no brain, there's no head, right? And actually in the United States, of course, we have a literal head, a literal leader with brain. Like he's physically got Alzheimer's dementia.
And we can't even bear
Like
to
he
look
literally-
at it, right?
And we can't bear to look
him.
at it. Right. Right.
I mean,
So
when was
not
the
just-
last time we had a head, though, politically speaking, that you would respect?
We had a
and that you would-
figure head. We've always
Okay.
had, since
We've had
1962, a figure head. We had
I mean, I was going to go farther back. Who was it? I was watching a video. He was espousing all the virtues of Tate, right? And who's the corpulent guy, the big president? Is that the one I'm thinking
Taft,
of? Right?
you mean?
Taft.
You're thinking about Taft. Yeah.
Yeah, Taft. You're like, But you're supposed to look at his actions, but of course, if you looked at him, but you didn't have to look at him. You didn't have television, so I guess that's fine.
Right.
His corpulency.
Do you know his policies while president, or do you know that he got stuck in a tub?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Because you're taught he got stuck in a tub. That's what you're taught in school.
So that's the difference between an actual head and a figurehead.
Correct.
And I think
figurehead. I would call it a totem, right? A figurehead is literally a totem. It's totemic. Yeah, it represents something.
Well, but I mean, we do have a representative government, and I'm not politically, but even, but the Father represents God the Father. No, I'm talking about
on paper. We have representative government on paper.
Okay, yes, I know in our national politics and our local. No, but I'm talking about scripturally speaking, like the Father represents God the Father, the pastor represents that household.
Moses to his family. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. There's all sorts of and even Moses is a representative of.
Correct. He's the mouth of God.
Well, and he ends up being also the intercessor, so he ends up typifying Jesus too.
He is the mediator, of course. Yeah.
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 And so we have all of this, and the pastor, we do this, right, liturgically. Like we stand and we speak on behalf of God to the people, and then we also intercede on behalf of the people to God. Right. And you're like, well, is that totemic? I think it's actual, right? But
that's the figurehead is a bastardization of the mediator, who is Christ, who is Joshua. I would go further than Moses and say, let's talk about Joshua.
Because Joshua's he's less dimly mirrored. Yes.
Right.
Moses' intercession is always begrudgingly and kind of, he's just a grumpy pants. It's like, these people, they're going to kill me. So it's not quite as Christ-like. Yes.
Mm-hmm. But he grew up in Pharaoh's house. And I think that Moses thinks much more like an aristocrat, whereas Joshua thinks more like a military leader, right? He's kind of like Maximus in Gladiator.
Yep.
And so as I get older and learn more, I recognize in Moses more of an aristocrat, more of a pundit. And it depends, books you read and what extra biblical books you read. He was a servant of Pharaoh. He was sent down to Ethiopia.
Well, and there's no doubt that amongst Israel in the desert, his family's the wealthiest. I mean, he comes out with the most.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, you get to Joshua and Caleb all of a sudden, you're like, well, this is a totally different act. Because Joshua, he has elders, and they're faithful to him, and they don't turn their backs to him, and they don't ever, they're not like, we're going to do idolatrous things. They're like, no.
And that all comes out of necessity, right?
But it goes back to mediation, is that Joshua as an intercessor, a mediator, that's exactly the point, is like, no, we're going that direction, and we don't need Moses anymore. We need a Joshua, because we're going to now, I am the Lord your God who led you out of slavery in Egypt. Now it is, I'm the Lord your God who is leading you into the land of milk and honey.
Right. So Moses has to. Already. Moses is and Joshua is a picture of like John the Baptist and Jesus, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I must decrease that he increase, and
right.
But so what I was going to say, I was going to say something about your totemic thing, because I think that actually is a really good explanation for the way that people treat just the order of reality. Well, of course there's the father, and of course the husband's the head of the household. Of course, they say.
As a figurehead. He's a figurehead.
As a figurehead, right.
Yeah, he's totemic.
But not in an actual practical, definitional way. He's not going to defend his family. Right. He's not, that's somebody else's responsibility. It's just.
Well, it happened last week, because last Sunday was Father's Day. Mm-hmm. And what I encountered were posts and comments such as, hey, let's hear it for all the women, the single moms that have to be dads too.
What? I did not see any of those.
Yeah, I get those.
Seriously.
And yeah. And I'm like, but you're not.
That's actually a lament. Like, look at the effect of sin on this world, and that these women don't have fathers for their children.
Which we're going to turn into a celebration.
But we're going to turn that we're going to celebrate it now. Thank God that these people step up to the plate and take over for their deadbeat
Well, they
husbands.
have to. They don't have a choice, because there isn't a father there. But at the same time, don't celebrate it.
Well, no, it's worse than that.
And also, don't pretend like it's true. It's not true. You're not their father.
No, there is somebody serving as a father, but it may not be. It may be
that's
the
what
phone,
I mean about the figurehead. That's I bring it up as not to insult or be pejorative. It's mother. In fact, I'm saying that you're denigrating yourself as a mother by trying to take on the vocation of father simultaneously.
Correct.
Because traditionally and historically and biblically, your call is to nurture and to teach your children kindness. My call as a father is to protect and defend my children and teach them to be cruel, because the world is cruel.
Right.
And You need both cruelty and kindness. Otherwise, you get a child that's either going to be a doormat or a tyrant. You need both. And in our culture, because the father and the mother, by the way, are both seen as figureheads, you can simply, again, take out mother and just
Just
click
cut
in
and
a new
paste.
mother. Take
Yeah,
out the
yeah.
father, click in a
Yep.
new father.
Yep.
Whether it be teachers, whether it be politicians, whether any authority figure becomes
Sometimes
then
pastors
father or
too.
mother.
Ends up being the
Sometimes
father figure.
pastors, right?
Yeah.
For sure. We mix and match. We farm that out. And because again, we reject calling, we reject hierarchy and authority, we reject God. And we don't say, well, the pastor is the mouth of God. He's an intercessor before the congregation on behalf of God.
It's like that.
And
What was the realization I had earlier this week? Again, I posted this on Twitter. I don't know why I posted on Twitter, but what was it? I have to go back and find it now. That without knowing the subjection of the Son to the Father, God the Son to God the Father, you'll never understand the subjection of. You'll never understand the subjection of Christians to one another, slaves to masters,
Correct.
citizens to authorities, children to parents, or wife to husband.
Philemon.
I know. That's what I mean. That's the thrust of the book.
Subtext of Philemon.
It's like and that it doesn't change the earthly ordering of things. That actually it drives them further into it to submit to the master as a Christian, because we're both Christians.
Right.
And
My
it's
son
like,
asked me that at chapel is, why does Paul call himself a slave?
yes, there you go. Yeah.
And it was in relation to, then we were reading Philemon that day, and then broaden that out the other epistle where he says, I am a slave for Christ. And what that means, to your point, like in relation to earthly masters, but is Jesus like earthly masters? No, he's not. Because, it's not tyrannical, and it's to drive you deeper into a relationship with him, not further away.
So I've seen this, right, where you step outside the hierarchy that God establishes for you, right, vocationally, where he calls you, where he puts you, and it makes you vulnerable and weak, and because you lose the whole structure that supports you.
Correct.
Right? And that protects you.
You tumble down the
everything
mountain.
above and below. Yeah.
You look at the
and now you're
cosmic
just
mountain.
vulnerable.
Exactly. Well, not only that, but when you look upwards on the cosmic mountain, of course, at the very top is Christ. And at the very bottom, the sheep, goats, and they're on the desert. They're on the cracked earth, and you're standing on the beach looking out at the abyss and Leviathan, and you're not looking up, you're looking down. And when you start looking down and looking around, you start distinguishing sheep from goats. Start looking at the dead earth. You look at the place of the skull. You look at the abyss. You look up and you see Christ. And all that other stuff, that just fades away now. It's behind you.
Yeah.
And if Christ is behind you, then earth is hell. Life is hell. Because you're not looking up. You're looking down. And there's nothing down there except the abyss.
Right.
And and sorry, Nietzsche, but when you look into the abyss doesn't look back, it swallows you. It just swallows you because you become hopeless and you say, well, what's the point? There's no point. We're all going there anyways. I might as well just end it faster than later. And this is the quote unquote existential crisis that Kierkegaard is wrestling with. This is what it comes out of. I shouted into the abyss, and all I heard was my own voice coming back at me, echoing back at me. No, Kierkegaard had big problems with a hidden God. Big problems. He was Lutheran, by the way, raised Lutheran.
Well, yeah. I mean, the Danish church,
But an
the state
Enlightenment
church
Lutheran.
is. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's dive into Fear and Trembling, introduction number 2.
Okay.
Kierkegaard writes, not only in the world of commerce, but also in the world of ideas, our age has arranged a regular clearance sale. Everything may be had at such absurdly low prices that very soon the question will arise whether anyone cares to bid. Think of Gomer. Every waiter with a speculative turn carefully marks the significant progress of modern philosophy. Every lecturer in philosophy, every tutor, student, every sticker and quitter of philosophy, they are not content with doubting everything, but quote unquote, go right on. It might, possibly, be ill-timed and inopportune to ask them whither they are bound. But it is no doubt polite and modest, to take it for granted that they have doubted everything. Else it were a curious statement for them to make that they were proceeding onward. So they have, all of them, completed that preliminary operation, and it would seem with some ease that they do not think it necessary to waste a word about how they did it. The fact is, not even he who looked anxiously and with a troubled spirit for some little point of information ever found one, nor any instruction, even a little dietetic prescription as to how one is to accomplish this enormous task. Quote, but did not Descartes proceed in fashion? Descartes, indeed, that venerable, humble, honest thinker, whose writings surely no one can read without deep emotion. Descartes did what he said, and said what he did. Alas, alas, that is a mighty rare thing in our time. But Descartes, as he says frequently enough, never uttered doubts concerning his faith.
So what's
So
it
you're
getting
walking
after?
away, huh? You're
Yeah.
walking away. Okay, what are you walking away from? And what are you walking toward?
So he's talking
And
about
the answer is,
like,
yeah.
no, go ahead. You were going to say.
I was going to say, so Plato, he coins, or at least popularizes the kind of idea of the marketplace of ideas. That philosophy is a marketplace of ideas, right? And so you have all of these philosophers
And
set
the
up
truth,
stalls.
and the truth ultimately is superior and will win the
Yes,
day.
right. That yeah, but it's still a marketplace, and every philosopher has got his stall and searching out then the truth. And I think within then Kierkegaard's context, he's saying like, it's all commerce. Commerce and ideas are entwined, and there's a clearance sale, and it's absurdly cheap to buy the truth nowadays. And so people say, I don't want to buy anything. I'm just going to walk away, leave them.
Right, but isn't his other concern here is that the ideas have no
Value.
like they have no value because they're not actually put into effect.
Correct.
They don't.
Right.
They don't. Well, and to use the existential kind of term, I mean, it doesn't change it doesn't change how you
Correct.
live.
It is philosophy for the sake of philosophy. Let's go down to the salon and drink coffee and argue about philosophy.
It was kind of like what I did in my sermon, and I've heard this from. I don't remember who I got this from, but you're talking about like, well, Jesus died on the cross to forgive you your sins. That's an idea, but it actually has to be applied, like for the sake of faith, so that that you believe it and you receive the benefit of it, right? So it's like, no. So, oh, by the way, since that sounds a little abstract, here's the concrete. I forgive you in the name of Jesus, right? It's
It's
done.
like I say, Jesus' death on Golgotha is a historical fact that provides no benefits for you whatsoever today. That Luther said that's no good hyper. Luther
It's a nice
then
story.
says you
That's
don't go
kind
to
of beneficial.
Golgotha, you go to the sacrament.
Right.
If you want what Jesus did on Golgotha to be applied to you, you go to the sacrament of the altar. But as a historical event, it has nothing to offer you other than just, hey, let me tell you a cool story about how
Was
Jesus
crucified
died.
under Pontius Pilate. Okay,
Yeah.
nice.
Cool. Does that up to me today? It doesn't.
That's
That's
it's
why
about
I
as
despise that hymn, Were You There When They Crucified My Lord?
Yeah. Okay, here we're gonna get everybody upset.
Because you're trying to
was
jump the fence metaphysically, and it doesn't work.
Well, it's like the significance of I don't know, some Caesar crossing the Tiber or something. You're like, well,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, it's a historic event and it happened. Or Napoleon, where was the big battle in Russia? I can't remember.
You mean Waterloo?
Waterloo. There we go. Yeah, Waterloo. We're like, well, yeah, that was significant, and the whole world changed as a result of that.
Yeah.
But it didn't change you.
Right.
It actually has zero effect on you.
I know.
'Cause
Until Abba said about it, that changed my life.
Oh, that was changing, life-changing experience.
Life-changing. It's a great single, Waterloo.
I don't know this one.
Greatest pop band ever, man.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but
Yeah.
perfect pop band.
That's right.
Yeah,
Practically
so that's
perfect in every way.
that's his concern. Like even Descartes was like, no, this does affect me. Like,
Right.
Yeah, I might doubt a lot of things, but I don't doubt my faith. You see,
Correct.
So he even puts it in its place. He puts the ideas. They're not driving into every aspect. This, I think therefore
Well, it
I
could be
am. Right? That's
subservient to
Descartes.
my faith.
Oh,
Any
well, there you
ideas
go.
that I may have must be subservient to faith.
Yeah, and we've had that
Again,
conversation
Christ
where
is the head. Yeah.
Where like reason, yes, when it's put in the place of faith, it becomes the devil's whore, right? But
Right.
but it can be brought into service because it has to, like, in order to be able to read a sentence, you have to use reason to actually.
Then it's the queen of the faculties. Right.
Exactly. It becomes a servant.
Right.
So it's a helping office. And even philosophy, I could say, I think it's helpful, as a servant.
Vocationally,
again.
it's helpful, I would say.
Yeah. Or conversations about ethics, like make
Sure.
your bed or something.
Yeah.
It's not the gospel, and it's certainly, it's not even the
It's
law,
downstream
really.
of the gospel.
But
it's all
It's way
downstream.
downstream. It's way downstream.
Right. But it's still there.
Yeah, and you could do this with like political rights, so-called rights,
Right.
unalienable ones, like the right to property. Like, how do you get that out of the Bible? Well, actually, you could. Yeah, I think you, but it's not explicit. It's like you said, downstream. Yeah,
But it's
or
like
protection.
Paul saying, be sober-minded and self-controlled, for example. Great.
There you
How?
go.
That's when you can apply philosophy to that, though.
Yeah,
be
exactly.
sober-minded and self-controlled, obviously, in your vocation. So how do I do that, though? Well, you make your bed. That's a great way to do it, right? In other places, he's more specific of like, don't be a drunk. Don't get drunk on strong wine. Discipline your children, right? Keep your house in order. And other times he just says,
So this is
don't
definitely
suffer,
a problem.
Don't do envy.
In the early, mid 19th century, for Kierkegaard, but it's definitely a problem today where people are like,
Right.
my ideas are right, even though when they're put into practice, they bring death, misery, and suffering.
Right.
Here I'm thinking
Right.
of, I don't know, Marxism or something, right?
Right.
Where you're like, yeah, it sounds like a good idea on paper, abstractly, but in practice, it's 100 million
Right.
people dead in a century,
Well, here's a practical application I just remembered. So, moralistic therapeutic deism, right? This is the Christianity of his day. So he rails against the wealthy for buying their pews, buying the special spot in church, right? Where they can sit up front and they dress a certain way and they always open their carriages and the drivers sit outside and you get the best parking spot. That's a part of paying for your, paying your way. And he's like, well, wait a minute. So you make the poor sit in the back or stand in the back or stand up in the choir loft or wherever, and you don't allow them to sit because they're poor. But didn't Jesus have a lot to say about taking the highest seat and about
that's
the
where I was
poor
going.
and so
Yeah,
on?
that's great. That's
Right.
great.
And so you say in church, like the preacher gets in the pulpit and talks about being a good Christian, be moralistic, right? Be a good Christian. In the name of Jesus, be a good Christian. You're hypocrites. You're liars. You want to be seen for all of your good works, but you don't want to then say, here, take my spot. You can't even afford to, buy a second
Right.
change of clothing. Which again is why he's railing against the state church, because it's Christ covered, but it's not Christ focused. They cover everything in Jesus' language, but even like I've talked about before with other philosophers, like Feuerbach, when Feuerbach actually discovers the primary text of Luther and other reformers, he is stunned. Everything he was taught about being a Lutheran growing up in the catechisms of his day, his father was a pastor. He's like,
Right.
I was never taught these things about Jesus. No, this the sacrament. So he was in love. He was in love with the Reformation teachings, but he despised the Lutheranism of his time for
What is
not
it,
only
like,
being
like all of the word and none of the substance or something like that. I don't know what the
pretty much.
expression would be.
All light, no heat. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I get it. You're go ahead.
Yeah. So he's dealing with appearances. But he's also dealing with philosophy as an abstract, really a pointless venture,
Right.
as far as like applying to life,
Yeah.
This is that's interesting. That's kind of the part of the conceit of what was the big movie last summer? Oh, Oppenheimer, right? It's like, well, what's the point of like talking about all this in the abstract if we don't actually do it?
Right.
Well, the doing of it is death and destruction, so that might be the reason not to do it. But even though
Well,
you
the
can,
military-industrial complex has something to say about that.
right? But this is
Raytheon,
like,
so on.
we have these ideas, but if we don't actually try to do it, then why?
Right.
Like, what is it? It's just information with no purpose.
It's another figurehead. It's another totem.
Yeah,
That's why we love
exactly.
movies and shows about rebels, but we never rebel.
They can take the place. It's vicarious
Yeah,
living.
it's
I like it.
Yeah, exactly. Vicarious satisfaction. Yeah.
The wrong kind.
The wrong kind, exactly. So in our times, Kierkegaard writes, as was remarked, no one can take with faith, but goes right on. The question as to whether they are proceeding may be a silly question. Where are you going? Might be a silly question. Whereas it is a sign of urbanity and culture to assume that everyone has faith to begin with, for else it were a curious statement for them to make that they are proceeding further. In the olden days, it was different. Then faith was a task for a whole lifetime, because it was held that proficiency in faith was not to be won within a few days or weeks. He might as well be describing modern Christianity in a nutshell at this point.
No doubt. Like
'Cause
he's
this
saying, like daily catechesis, this is what you should be doing, studying God's word together and discussing it.
No, I'm confirmed. I'm good.
Yeah,
I read
exactly.
that. Hence, when the tried patriarch felt his end approaching, oh, this is the best part. Now, this is where the quote comes from. So when the patriarch felt his end approaching after having fought his battles and preserved his faith, he was still young enough at heart not to have forgotten the fear and trembling which disciplined his youth, and which the mature man has under control, but which no one entirely outgrows, except insofar as he succeeds in going on as early as possible. The goal which those venerable men reached at last, at that very spot everyone starts, in our time, in order to proceed further. Keep going.
What is he?
Where are you going?
Right.
Well,
Well,
to
so part of his concern here is, that feature of the state church where to be a citizen is to be baptized, and to be baptized to be a citizen. And it is,
Yeah.
I mean, it's worse than, I think, probably, I don't know. It's probably worse than the way that people treat baptism and baptism's confirmation, than what we have as like a ticket to heaven or something like that.
No, they thought the same thing, for sure.
So it's actually the same
Read
thing. It's just,
Schleiermacher. Like,
well,
even,
I know, but I'm
Schleiermacher's
saying, is
before
it worse?
Kierkegaard.
Is it worse now or then? That's, I don't know. Maybe that's an unfair comparison. It seems like it's the same. Maybe it's just the same.
I don't know. I bet you it was more then, just because Christianity is, it's under Christendom. Lutheranism is the Christianity of the state. If you're baptized, you're told, be a good person, belong to the church, believe in God, and you.
Oh,
go
I
to
thought
heaven.
of the expression that I was trying to come up with before: all the flavor, none of the calories. Anyway.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
But that is what he's describing, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's like you don't have to actually put any effort in,
No.
because you were persevered because you paid the dues and you maintained your status, and
Came to church 2, 3, 4 times a year to commute. You're good.
you're still on the roster as a member. So you
There we
can
go.
go on further now. See, good.
Exactly.
All good to go.
Yep.
Good to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want people to have confidence that, in the resurrection of the body and life everlasting, of course, right? But his point is, I think the confidence is coming, in like a, not even performative way. What is it? There's no need for faith is the point, ultimately, right?
Right. Well, once saved, always saved. You're baptized,
yeah, it's
right?
that.
You,
Yeah, it's
you
that,
pay your
too.
dues, right?
Mm-hmm. You're part of the culture. You haven't
You're good.
lived in a moral,
You're
and
good.
he does have a concern about moral living, right? But for them,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
there's that deceitful appearances versus what's actually being done, privately, and
Right.
which nobility are really good at.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me that Kierkegaard lives from approximately 1813 to 1855, and Pilgrim's
55.
Progress was written, in 1678? Something like that? Yeah, 1678. So this has been around, like I said, for a while. This isn't just something that came on the scene out of the blue, and Kierkegaard saying, well, what a shock. Because I think of Pilgrim's Progress in the same sense of where are you going to, right? We're going further on, right?
Right.
In wrestling matters of faith and piety. And what is the Christian life? We talked about this with Schaeffer last week, right?
Yeah.
True spirituality, as he calls. And of course, you read the Didache, for example, or the Shepherd of Hermas, and they're wrestling with it in the earliest days of the church. Paul, obviously, in his epistles and his arguments, is what place is works? What place is charity in the Christian life? And again, for Kierkegaard, as a Dane at that time in the early to mid 1800s, it is, you're baptized, you're Lutheran, you're a Christian, and as long as you show up in church and pay your dues once in a while, you're good. You're good. You believe in God, right? Of course I believe in God. You're fine. That's it.
Yeah. So the question is, if that's nothing new, it doesn't sound like it
Mm-hmm.
is based off the evidence you just kind of laid out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's that all the substance or all of the style, none of the substance. That'd be another way to put
Yeah.
it too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we see this with Israel, wilderness Israel in particular.
Mm-hmm.
You see that with the performative aspect of the
Right.
second temple in particular, right? The
Mm-hmm.
Herod's temple. It's like we got all the sacrifices, and Jesus is like, you're just buying and selling, and
Yeah.
like, where's the faith? So it's really the
Right.
same criticism, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's what Kierkegaard's saying is like
Mm-hmm.
nominally Christian, I guess, is the language we would use today.
Right.
You know?
It's human nature. It's Luther's point about, or analogy of the drunk trying to get the stirrups on the horse.
Mm.
And as a pastor, you say, listen, I'd much rather you have faith in Christ than put on your Sunday best to come to church. And people then will take that to mean, well, I can dress however I want so long as I come to church.
Right.
Versus you say, hey man, I think it'd be nice if you dress up because you're coming into God's house and really present yourself, because you're coming to a wedding feast. And then it's the opposite. Well, I dressed up and I don't really believe in any of the Jesus stuff, but I have, I make the appearance of being there and being a Christian. We're always falling into one or the other ditch. We can never just hold the two together. Say like dress up for church and have faith in Jesus. Right? It's
Yeah.
human nature.
Well, I mean, because it's just the order of operation, right? Where you say the
Yeah.
external, if
Mhm.
it's done thoughtfully, it's going to be a reflection of what's believed,
Right. Right.
right? This is true for liturgy
Yeah.
as well, not just for,
Yeah.
dress. And,
Mhm.
and so this is always my question, right? Oh, because somebody was mocking, women who wear head coverings. And, that's very Eastern, but there's some Lutherans doing it now. And so,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, but those women, and, they probably chained to the stove and everything. And so they get
Handmaid's
completely,
Tale, obviously. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And you're like,
Yeah.
do you think that's actually what they believe? Maybe you can ask them, why do you do the head covering? What are you trying to confess there? What does
And why
it
do
say
you
for
care
you?
that they use their Christian freedom to wear a head
Because
covering?
you're not
Why do you
doing
care?
it. Well, because you're not
Cool.
doing it. It's a comparison thing,
Of course.
right? But
there it is.
but just on
Yeah.
appearances, not on faith. Just like,
Correct. Mhm.
Uh,
And the opposite is true too. The farmers that come into church with dirty boots and dirt under their nails, who come straight from the barn out to church. You're like,
I
"Oh,
wish
you
I
couldn't
had
clean
that.
up before
I
you
would-
got here." I'm like,
I would take it. It's like,
I
thanks for
do.
coming.
gladly, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm like,
exactly.
You left the shop to come to church. I'm like, you're awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like, well,
Still
who
got
else
the
is gonna
grease
bring my
on your
kids to
hands?
church? I'm like, oh, you're making me melt.
There's something about putting the sacrament in somebody's greasy hand. It's
It's so great. It's great.
yeah, it's
Like they were
profound.
literally just pulled up out of the abyss and just give it.
That's nice.
But no, it's human nature because the old Adam either suffers from complete libidinous,
Mhm.
proclivities, or becomes a rigorous list. We just can't seem to find the
You sound
middle
like
path between
that's
the
almost
two.
like the synthesis, the Hegelian synthesis. That's what you want.
Yes, that's exactly what I want. That's why I keep using the word tension.
No, dichotomy,
let-
tension. Those are
Yeah,
helpful
let it all
terms.
just melt together. Right.
Yeah.
Well, this is why
No.
I hate this symbol in the Lutheran Church. We hate it because you have
The
to live in the
push-pull,
tension
yeah.
between being sinful and
Mhm.
yet being righteous in
Mhm.
Christ. We hate being righteous in Christ. He's a person. So we just assume
It's-
Christ into
It
us.
was interesting. It was interesting how much people kind of have responded to the beginning of Romans 6, right, where he says, "Reckon yourselves dead to sin." You're like,
Yes.
but how?
Right.
Like because I'm dying and alive.
Yeah, reckon.
It-
Yeah. Just
it's
consider
like by
yourself
faith. Yeah. Consider yourself
Yeah.
dead, and you're like,
Yeah.
well, how am I supposed to live that way? Well,
That's my
yeah,
whole
this
sermon on Sunday, which you will read shortly.
I will read it. I'll
This is
look
my
at it.
whole sermon. I spend 90% of the sermon setting up the congregation.
There you go.
For the, because if you're a Lutheran, then you know who the death of death is. And so I get so upset, and my Bible class is familiar enough with this now that they've learned. But I get so upset when people talk about their sin and don't talk about Christ becoming sin for them. Drives me nuts now.
Yeah,
Like,
because
why
they
do you
consider
about
their
sin?
sin still
Yeah.
alive, right?
It's mine.
Not dead.
It's mine.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like, no, it's not. I'm like, but you also talk about death that way too.
Mhm.
Well, I'm going to die, Pastor. No, you're not. Christ already died for you. The death you're experiencing is actually Christ's death. So stop talking about death and start talking about Christ. It's the embodiment of these ideas is what I'm driving at. Is Kierkegaard
Yeah.
saying, like, you guys live in the realm of ideas, and ideas are easy to walk away from. And ideas are easy to pursue because then you go, well, what are you pursuing? This idea. Okay, but
It's
how are you going
the-
to get there?
what the hippie people call it? The Christ consciousness.
Yeah.
You're like, what is that? What's this? The
But
ideas of Jesus? You're
yeah, like to people that love the idea of eating a healthy diet. I talk to people that are in love with the idea of exercise and health and wellness. I talk to people who are in love with the idea of anarchy and
I know where
growing
this
their
is
own
going,
food,
but
right? But they don't because they don't want to do the work. Too
or
hard.
suffer the consequences. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's too hard. I tried and it's just too hard. I'm like, well, anything worth doing is hard because you're trying to participate in godly reality and the entire world is ganging up against you. Of course it's hard.
Yeah. Well, especially if you're like facing a firing squad or something. I mean, and you're like,
Or
rather than
just the look of your neighbor. Or the
today.
city council saying
That's
you're not
enough.
allowed to have a
That's
garden
actually
in your
enough probably
backyard.
today.
Oh,
Yeah, that's probably
that's
enough.
all it takes. I don't want someone to leave a negative comment.
What's a great great example story of this? Oh yes, the gym owner, right? What was it? Atlas Gym? Was that what it
Ian.
was in New Jersey? Ian.
Yeah, Ian.
Yeah, I don't know. He kind of went off social, I think, right? But
No, he's around still, but he's doing a lot of stuff.
well, he closed
locally.
the gym or he sold the gym or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yep, he sold out
but
because
they-
he's doing a lot of political stuff.
But they said nope, it was all completely illegitimate, and they revoked all the fines.
Yep.
But think about I mean, obviously he's a gym rat, so
Mhm.
having a strong character is part of his persona. But
100%. Mhm.
but look at the value of that. It's like resist for
Well, it inspired us.
years. It did, yeah, and it made it,
Yeah.
and it was an example to others as well.
Yeah.
And that wasn't even a matter of faith; it was just a matter of your rules are stupid.
Well, yeah, like if I shut my business down, we're going to starve. Like we're not going to be able
Well,
to
yeah,
survive.
there's the very practical of it as well. Yeah, never mind.
But no,
the illegitimacy
it's
of
always
it.
the wrestling match is that what are the consequences for coming to church? For most people, none. There's no consequence. It's
to
just
go or
something
to
you
not to go. Either way, probably.
Either way, right.
Yeah,
It's an
yeah.
idea. Church is an idea. I can take it or I can leave it. Like any franchise, like any business. I was going to run up to Starbucks to get a coffee, but I got distracted. I had some other things going on, so I'll just get coffee, from the local cafe. But tomorrow I'll get it on my way up. Not a big deal, right? Well, I missed.
I was
church
in the
this week. I'll
neighborhood.
come.
I was in the
Right.
neighborhood.
And especially if it's summer in the upper Midwest. I missed church for 3 months. Why? I was busy. How are you? That's funny. How busy you are during the summer when they're out of school and you have nothing going on other
Right.
than trying to fill that space with things.
Something. I don't know what.
So again, it goes back to, well, why don't you come home to your father's house? Well, I had other things that I needed to get done.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, but who's really doing the doing? You, or
Right.
is it your heavenly father that's doing it for you?
Yeah.
And
I've-
the
I've-
thing is,
I-
yeah.
I think I've cited it before, but I had one time I had somebody really just a remarkable statement. They were dealing with some serious personal issues, and they said, Pastor, I'll be back at church when I get it all worked out. And it was exactly that point. It's like, how are you going to work this out without hearing God's
Yeah.
word and having that and
Yeah.
and being forgiven? Hearing that and receiving
Now-
that in your mouth.
On the flip side,
Mm-hmm.
there's also the fact that the Holy Spirit will drive people away from the church for a time
Yeah,
out into the wilderness.
that's hard to hear.
There's
though.
that too. I know. That's why I bring it up. It's a fact. We want to say, well, the Holy Spirit only drives people one direction. It's linear from their home to my church and then back home, right? Like they're kept.
Mhm.
It's like, no, the Holy Spirit's going to drive you out into the wilderness. And out there, you're going to struggle and you're going to be faced with death, demons, and confronted.
And sin's going to compound on sin, and
Yeah, it's all a part of that. He's going to lead you through the wilderness in order to bring you back to the table. We all experience it, actually. We're all going
But
through
the
it. We're all
joy and the
being-
refreshment of being brought back,
Yeah.
after being gone.
Yeah.
It is a cause for rejoicing. The angels sing,
Mhm.
the whole
Absolutely.
thing. Yeah.
But as a pastor, I accept the fact that each of us is, when we leave God's, excuse me, when we leave God's house, even if it's just across the parking lot, you're leaving God's house. You're entering back into the wild places, where the wild things are. And each of us, to a greater or lesser degree, then is exposed to the wild things throughout the week, throughout the day. And there are just some that have to be driven deeper into the woods. That's
Well,
what
and
he
even
does.
if we take a couple weeks off, if you're not celebrating for 2 weeks, like you're just
Mhm.
on vacation or whatever, you're traveling something, and
Mhm.
I mean, even as a pastor, it's like, man, maybe maybe I don't need to go back. It's
Well,
like, how could you even think that? And it's like, well, because the
because you're
Lord put
living
me there.
according to the if-then of the law
Mhm.
rather than the because or the gospel.
Yeah, exactly.
And so,
Exactly.
stop saying if and say because people are not at church for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months. Therefore, God's doing
Hmm.
something with them. I'm just not a part of it.
Well, and it's hard to call that good then as well, I think.
You
But
don't know.
this,
That's
well,
the thing. Who am I
yeah,
to
God
say whether
does.
it's good or not? Well,
Right.
God is good.
It's just like with Joseph and his brothers. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, in the after the fact, you can say that was a good thing. I'm glad that happened that way, even though
Right.
it was terrible and you left me for dead. And I should hate you, but
Well, but that's the thing, right? Is I brought this up in class Wednesday morning. Is we think that it's his brothers throwing him down the well and selling him and blah 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 that he says what you brothers intended for evil, God used for good. No, this was actually God's intent the whole time because it's his vision. The vision
Mhm.
that God gives him, this is the actual vision. Like this is the playing
that
out
he
of
can
the vision.
turn anything, any even
Right.
most
What I'm saying
like
is like we
yeah.
always think of it in terms of like, well, his brothers did a bad thing and God and Joseph sees the good
Oh,
in
I
it.
see.
It's a very
Yeah.
moralistic turn. Versus no, when God gives him the vision, everything that follows is exactly what was going to happen regardless.
Correct. Yeah, that's the
Because
consequence.
it's actually not about Joseph, it's about Judah. That entire thing's about Judah. Because Judah is actually the progenitor of Jesus, not Joseph.
It is interesting that we call them the Joseph narratives, and it's 10 chapters of Genesis, right? And
Yeah.
but it's all for the sake of preserving Judah.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's so
Eh,
crazy.
and he does intercede on behalf of Joseph, so Joseph isn't killed right away anyway.
Right. But saying like, no, the whole purpose of Joseph's vision ultimately is we got to get Judah from point A to point B so that this can keep going.
Well, that's the foxiness of it, I suppose. Yeah.
And so we have to be very careful of these end statements because they do turn into moralistic judgments rather than the
Right.
because therefore statements of like, well, because God gave Joseph, and like I pointed out, Joseph doesn't have a preacher. He's given two sets of visions, and that's that.
Well, in the spiritual gift of interpretation.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right, exactly. So he's given the visions, he's given the gift of interpretation of discernment. That for him is enough, and it guides him for decades, right? And so he's able to then say when he encounters his father and brothers again, and then after his father dies, again, his brothers never actually repent. They're afraid of him. Even when he says, "I'll put your children in my lap," they're like, to kill them.
It's fear and trembling. It's fear and trembling. Yeah.
It is fear and trembling, exactly, because they're like the older brother in the parable saying, "Well, but I've served you every day of my life." Joseph saying, "You didn't have to. You don't have to serve me. You're my brothers. I love you. I forgive you."
Yeah.
And again, it's because therefore the gospel that offends us so deeply, because in practical terms, then when, especially pastorally, hopefully you're dealing in what's real and not just in the realm of ideas. But you do, I think, at a certain point, if you want to be a healthy pastor and maintain your sanity, your faith, you have to live in the because therefore. You can't exist in the if thens. You can't. Because most, if not all of your people that come to the door are living in the if then of the world, the if then of traditions, customs, ceremonies, values, rules, laws.
Well, and like you were saying, coming home to the Father, I mean, they think of it in that terms too. Like, if I show up
Yeah.
again, what's going to happen to me? And I'm like,
Right.
nothing. I mean, you're back.
But most
Like,
people
what do you
think
want me
of
to
the church
do?
as a franchise, and most people have broken homes.
You
and
want
don't
me to
even
like give
realize
you a
it.
spanking if you come home or something? Like, why
Right.
would I do that?
Yes.
Do that anyway?
Yes.
Maybe
well,
that
they
is
want
what
you to
they want.
berate them because that's what their parents do to them.
Where have you been? What's wrong with you?
That's what grandma and grandpa do. That's what the mother-in-law, father-in-law do. That's what siblings do. We berate you. We judge you. We condemn you because it allows us to elevate ourselves above you. First, like, I've missed you. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
Right. But, it makes us feel good to judge.
Well,
And
and
so
there may be a
the-
judgment, but they've already suffered it. Is the point?
The judgment is Jesus died for you. Welcome
Right.
home.
Right.
The man we speak of was no thinker, that is Descartes. He felt no desire to go beyond his faith. It seemed to him the most glorious fate to be remembered as the father of faith, and a most inviolable lot to be possessed of that faith, even if no one knew it. The man we speak of was no learned exegetist. He did not even understand Hebrew. Who knows? But a knowledge of Hebrew might have helped him to understand readily both the story and Abraham. And then he dives in. God tempted Abraham and said to him, "Take Isaac, thine only son, whom thou lovest, and go to the land of Moriah, and sacrifice him there on a mountain which I shall show thee. It was early in the morning. Abram arose betimes and had his asses saddled. He departed from his tent, and Isaac with him. But Sarah looked out of the window after them, and they were out of sight. Silently they rode for 3 days. But on the 4th morning, Abraham said not a word, but lifted up his eyes and beheld Mount Moriah in the distance. He left his servants behind, and leading Isaac by the hand, he approached the mountain. But Abraham said to himself, I shall surely conceal from Isaac whither he is going. He stood still. He laid his hand on Isaac's head to bless him, and Isaac bowed down to receive his blessing. And Abraham's aspect was fatherly. His glance was mild, his speech admonishing. But Isaac understood him not. His soul would not rise to him. He embraced Abraham's knees. He besought him at his feet. He begged for his young life, for his beautiful hopes. He recalled the joy in Abraham's house when he was born. He reminded him of the sorrow and the loneliness that be after him. Then did Abraham Then Abraham averted his face for a moment. But when Isaac looked again, his father's countenance was changed, his glance wild, his aspect terrible. Seized Isaac and threw him to the ground, and said, Thou foolish lad, believest thou I am thy father? An idle word am I. Believest thou it is God's command? Nay, but my pleasure. Then Isaac trembled, cried out in his fear, God in heaven, have pity on me. God of Abraham, show mercy to me. I have no father on earth, but thou then my father. Be thou then my father. But Abraham said softly to him, Father in heaven, I thank thee. Better is it that he believes me inhuman than that he should lose his faith in thee. When the child is to be weaned, his mother beckons breast, for it were a pity if her breast should look sweet to him when he is not to have it. Then the child believes that her breast has changed, but his mother is ever the same. Her glance is full of love and as tender as ever. Happy he who needed not worse means to wean his child. If that's not autobiographical, holy cow.
Yeah, and he just kind of throws it out there at the end.
He really does, doesn't he?
His recounting
Here
of
I
the
am.
story of Abraham and Isaac,
Yeah.
I could see how this would be probably not the fundamentalist would not be a fan of it, because he's
Well, it's
taking
interesting, too.
liberty with the text.
Radically different Luther's interpretation of this text is than Kierkegaard.
Yeah, that's true too.
Luther's
So
all
what's-
about Abraham's faith, piety,
Correct, right, and that's how I've usually preached or taught it.
and trust in the resurrection, whereas Kierkegaard's like, no. It's the opposite, actually.
Or that Abraham, as that one line that he
Not
has
the
there
opposite.
at
You're
the
right.
end.
No, it's not the opposite. It's Abraham is covering God.
Right, and say that Isaac is trusting me too much. He needs to trust in you, and that's why he's doing
Wrong
this.
trusting in the wrong father here. Yeah.
Right, which is also true. I mean, the faith of Isaac is,
Yeah.
it needs to be turned away from his father. This is part of maturing, right? Is that that you, I mean, you have to strike out on your own, but you can't do it on your own. You need it. It has to be under God, right?
Right.
Under his providence and care and his word. So, it's an interesting take, though. And so, what's he trying to
is.
get after there? That
Well, it is jarring because what we just discussed. If you live in this culture of more or less therapeutic deism, where God just wants you to be happy, He loves you just the way you are, believe in God, behave yourself, belong to the church, and your spirit, your soul will go to heaven. It dies. When your body dies, your soul will go to heaven, and you'll be in eternal bliss. Right.
yeah,
And then he comes along and says, actually, God's going to kill you. That's what he does. And we're driving at Christ in his propitiation, driving at blood. And sometimes that means as a father, you have to be cruel in order to emphasize the kindness of God, to cover grace of God.
Oh, so he's getting after the fact that Abraham is disciplining Isaac
Yeah.
towards faith,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that
Pedagogy.
right. And
Yeah.
so then and if he's in this criticism of the church of his day and our day too,
Yeah.
we established, it's like there's no discipline towards for faith or in faith, but
Right.
rather it's all the ephemeral. It's like
Hmm.
we sometimes call it the feminized church, but I think it's probably that may be true. I just like to think of it like fluffy clouds,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
blue sky, and maybe a rainbow sometimes.
It's just a
And
purpose-driven life. That's all it is.
it's soft. I think maybe
Yeah.
that's another way to put it.
Yeah.
It's very soft. He calls it earlier. I think we skipped this part, but he calls it a beautiful Bible story about how God tempted Abraham. So he does
Yeah. That's
acknowledge
earlier.
that.
Yeah.
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 So there is a temptation towards Abraham, but there's also a strengthening of faith for Isaac, and he has
Right.
that double kind of work happening in the midst of it.
Well, and I wonder, I've criticized Luther's interpretation of Genesis for being too romanticized, too
Mhm.
pious, that he's trying to protect Abraham.
We've
yet
talked about this before,
simultaneously-
right? Didn't we? Didn't
Mhm.
we say that no, Abraham assents to the whole thing as if this is a normal kind of
Yeah.
command from God.
Well, it is, because for him, human sacrifice is, he grew up
Right,
around
exactly.
it. This culturally, this makes total sense. I think maybe in the Girard episode we talked about this.
Yeah, that
Yeah, and
sounds
Girard
right.
talks about it actually. Yeah, because in Girard, it's Isaac is the scapegoat, and then God
Mhm.
provides an actual scapegoat.
Right.
And it is interesting. Then you read Girard's meditation on this, you read Luther's meditation, you read Kierkegaard, and you see how, again, autobiographically and culturally, how each one is reading that text and saying, what's really at the heart of the text, right? What's the meat? What's the meaning? What higher truth?
Well,
is God trying to
it lends
teach us
itself
here?
to that because it's so enigmatic and
Yeah.
like why would God
Well, as
command
I-
this? And so then you talk about hidden God and yeah.
Why when Sarah dies is she somewhere else? Like, why
Hmm.
aren't they together? Why aren't they living together? It says that she was over there in a different city. That's not normal. You didn't do that. You didn't just wander away as a woman in those days, especially an old woman like Sarah. Like, why'd you go over there? Why'd you die over there? Why weren't you with Abraham in
It was
his
a road
tent?
trip. Go
Yeah.
see Taylor Swift or something. That's
Yeah,
what she was
something like
doing.
that. But I always, and I've read other exegetes who said, like, after he came back and then told her what he did, she left. She's like, we're out. Like, how dare you sacrifice our child? He's my only son. I'm like, that's
Yeah.
also an interesting interpretation of that text then. But it's forensically on the surface, it's very straightforward. It was this, then it was this, then it was this, then it was this. But then when you
Yeah,
ask
but-
questions of meaning and higher truth, you're like, oof.
Yeah, because I know I've had it happen to me more than once where someone will say, well, I mean, that sounds like child abuse. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Well, and what is the father killing, abandoning the son on the cross, but deicide, right?
Mm. Yeah, that's the new atheist, the radical atheist.
Yeah,
That was
exactly.
their big criticism.
Yeah, and so why not apply that to Abraham and Isaac too? Versus Luther saying, no, Abraham believed in the resurrection, which is why he took him up the mountain.
But that's Luther. Luther does that.
Yeah, that's Luther. That's what I'm saying. He's covering Abraham and Isaac and God and saying, like,
This is a
no, it's
confession
faith
of
that
Christ.
drives.
It has
Yeah.
to be a confession of Christ. Yeah. Yeah.
Versus, what if it's both at the same time?
Hmm.
Or, a fold interpretation or a fourfold interpretation. We could apply that even too.
But I mean, I do appreciate what he says here about to Isaac, Abraham looks like fearful, right? His countenance changed,
yeah.
his glance wild, his aspect terrible. He seized Isaac and
Yeah.
threw him to the ground.
Yeah.
It's like that. I mean, that is the experience. I mean, I think that's actually a pretty apt description of how sometimes it is when we're, when God
Afraid.
encounters us in His Word. No, I mean, it's
Yeah.
just like, this is terrible and and it's offensive and it's driving me mad.
No, I was saying when we're afraid, it comes out as rage and it's a franticness.
Okay.
When you're truly afraid, especially in this situation, like I'm going to kill my own child, like just the absolute dread that comes over you and the franticness then of that, because you want to get it over, because if you hesitate, you won't be able to do it.
Yeah. Well, and it's this knife's edge of
Yeah.
what between despair and hope and I guess death and life as well. I mean,
Yeah.
you run right up against the edge of it here because the
Yeah.
angel interrupts the whole scene, right?
Right. And then to conclude with, it's a weaning. That's really what's happening here. It's a weaning that's happening.
Yeah. I think that's actually an interesting way to think of it. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
now it's time. It's almost like a rite of passage then for Isaac, I guess you would
Right.
say.
Yes. 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 Yeah. Right.
You
You're not
know,
a child anymore. Time to
this
grow
is
up, be a
like
man.
here's your weapon. Now go out and we'll see you in 2 days.
Hmm.
you
And
know,
you have to lead the tribe. You have to take over now. You're the leader. So
but you can't do it
you
apart
can't
from
look to me
faith.
as your
Yeah.
father. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't do it apart from faith in God as Father, because Abraham and Sarah old when he's born. So they're really old by the time this happens.
She was 90. He was 90 some 99. Is that right?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. So they're old, really old. So give him credit for even climbing that mountain.
Yeah. Well, he was on a carnivore diet.
There we go. So then chapter 3. It was in the early morning. Abraham arose betimes. He kissed Sarah, the young mother. Sarah kissed Isaac, her joy, her delight for all times. And Abraham rode on his way, lost in thought. He was thinking of Hagar, her son. By the way, we, in the present tense, look back at the 80s and 90s. We've talked about this before, I think of. The 80s and the 90s were really, well, going back to the 60s, right? It was the heyday of fictional accounts of gospel texts. Walt Wangerin's a really popular guy from the 90s that would write novelized versions of biblical texts. But I always associated that with the 20th century, whereas Kierkegaard's doing it here in the 19th century.
Yeah, and they did it in Luther's day too. They had the chancel dramas and
That's true, the mystery plays.
the
Yeah.
mystery plays. Yeah, yeah.
Well, actually, going all the way back, then you have the Saxon Gospel, going back to
Yeah.
the 800s even. So it's always been there. So why is it then that we poop on these things? Now that I think about it, there's a tradition within Christian history that's been around.
Luther
almost
didn't.
since the
I
beginning.
wrote on this once. He's like, we should have them. Easter, Christmas, they're great for children.
Yeah.
Like, and the pageantry of it, we kind of mock. We have mocked.
Mhm.
I'm more receptive to it now because, especially if they're given to speak the gospel, so
Do you
it's
think
put in
that's
their
a
put in
product
their
of
mouth.
kind of rational materialism
What?
that we kind of disdain narrative theology and what he's doing here, where he's essentially speculating, right, filling in the gap, so to speak.
Well, because there's gaps, and so then the danger
Yeah.
is what is it godly or is it extra?
Well, that's
And
what
then
I'm
we have
saying,
that
though.
term
That's a kind of
extra,
rationalized explanation then of
right?
why we should fill in
Extra
the gaps,
biblical.
'cause-
But like we've talked
Yes.
about, I mean, the never mind like the official apocryphal books, but like Jubilees, I mean,
Yeah.
it's very insightful. Is
Yeah,
it scriptural?
and
I,
is quoted
I
by
was-
New Testament authors. Yes.
at times, right? So, or at least implied too, as well.
Yeah.
So you're like, well, this is informative and it's helpful, and
Mhm.
it can be in a sense devotional then too. It can
Right.
help understand or give us a broader understanding. Is
Right.
it authentic? Like came from an apostle or prophet or something? No.
But that goes back to the again rationalized materialistic understanding of these things.
Well, we put things
Because
into
if you're gonna-
categories, and yeah.
Well, that's what I'm
right.
saying. If you want to treat First Enoch and Jubilees, they're treating them as authoritative texts. They're not saying they're like pseudo-tech or pseudo-authoritative or anything. They're saying like, no, they're just we just don't read them within the context of the liturgy, but we
Right.
read them outside the liturgy and use them in commentaries.
Well, you know what I do? Because I put the notes in, like when we have the introits, and if you use a historic lectionary like we do, a lot of the
Mhm.
antiphons on
Sirach's
the
in there, yeah.
well, you're right. It'll say liturgical text in our hymnal, but
Yeah.
I insist on going figure out what it is. So I'll put
Yeah.
it in there, and they'll be like, "This is from the apocryphal Esther," and you're like, "Are we
Yeah,
using the apocryphal Esther in church?" Yeah, no,
yeah.
Or the Song of the Three Young Men, right? We sing that.
That
at the
makes it
vigil every
canonical
year.
now. If it's used in liturgy, that makes it canonical.
Well, it has been.
That's what it used to be.
Vatican
considered.
II dropped it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Well, Lutherans did
It's
too.
just interesting to
generally,
me
in
as a
English.
side note of how it seems then, recently, we don't like that stuff. It's not good.
Well, I think
Well,
it's
it's
the
been around
drama
for-
of it as well, the dramatization of it maybe. Because we've
Mhm.
talked about this, like the Passion movie uses all of that
Yeah.
that visionary language. What was her name? It wasn't.
Hildegard.
It wasn't. Was it Hildegard? No, I
Or
thought it was somebody
Perpetua.
else. No, he uses some other mystical person to kind of fill in some of those gaps. Her
Mhm.
mystical visions of the Passion. I can't remember.
Yeah,
who
the
it
Book
is.
of Jasher, which unfortunately a certain non-Christian sect latched onto and ruined for the rest of us.
Yeah, well,
But in the Middle Ages, yeah, sure, they liked it. Yeah, it's a medieval book from another book, but yeah,
Who did the Passion movie? Oh, Gibson, right.
yeah.
I'll see if I can find it.
The Resurrection, they've been talking about that for a while now, that's supposed to be coming out. Must have
Yeah.
got delayed.
He consulted the Dolorous Passion of Our Lord, a 200-year-old book by a Catholic mystic nun named Anne Catherine Emmerich. Have you heard this?
No. Interesting.
Yeah, well, this is the Baptists talking about it, so they're big fans, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Who's Sister Anne Emmerich? Augustinian nun who lived in Germany from 1774 to 1824. And she wrote about Jesus and Mary's life, from her bed. She was bedridden. Wow. Well, anyway, so, I mean, it's like, well, otherwise the movie would have been just kind of like, yeah, we've seen this all before. But
Right.
instead it's like,
Well, again,
what's
it
that?
would be like out of the Town book. Interesting characters, but no plot.
Right. Yeah, so she describes numerous devils among the crowd, exciting and encouraging the Jews, whispering in their ears, entering their mouths.
Okay. Yeah.
Which he picks up in the movie with that androgynous thing.
Yeah.
Right. Which may be Satan or whatever. But yeah. Well, it's interesting. It probably would be fun to read her.
That would be something.
Way
Yeah,
off the reservation, but
I was going to say, it definitely sounds like a banned books topic, though.
well, yeah, because the movie was kind of the Baptists here deleting the movie, the Dolorous Passion. Oh, I don't know where it went. Emmerich.com. There's a website, or was a
There
website.
we go.
Okay. Anyway,
So Abraham gets up. Sarah kisses them, says, "Have a good day, boys. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Listen to your father."
Yep.
So Abraham rode on his way, lost in thought. He was thinking of Hagar and her son, whom he had driven out into the wilderness. And here he is, driven by God out into the wilderness. He ascended Mount Moriah and he drew the knife. It was a calm evening when Abraham rode out alone. By the way, sorry.
Wait a minute. So you skipped the whole section. You just keep skipping. That's fine.
Did I skip two? I thought we
You
had
skipped
two.
two. But he keeps
I'm
telling
sorry,
the
we'll
same
go back.
story from a different perspective.
Okay, that's why
actually-
then. I was like, okay, that makes sense then. Okay,
Yeah.
I can back up.
And they all end
Go
with
through
the,
the
with the
Bible.
weaning. Yeah.
This goes back to what we were talking previously about not coming to church. Go through the Bible and make an account or make a note every time someone is led into the wilderness of God.
Mm.
Because of course
Or
we
driven.
all,
Yeah.
right, driven by the Holy Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, and angels ministered to him. Right, we always associate that with Jesus after his baptism, and we do a lot of tropology, right, out of the Old Testament. But that in particular, it's there constantly, obviously. But here's another instance then of like Abraham and Isaac were driven out into the wilderness to the mountain. And what happens? There's temptation, etc. Look at your people the same way. That there are going to be times and there's going to be instances where your people are driven out into the wilderness by God. And yes, they're being out in the wilderness to be tempted by Satan because God tempts no one to sin. But says the apostle, he will give us strength to resist the temptation when it comes over us.
Right.
Right? And so why be driven out into the wilderness? Well, we know why. To be ministered by angels, to have your faith strengthened, and then to return. Right? And there's something about the symbolism of being outside versus being inside, being at the table versus being out in the wilderness and having to depend on God to provide for you. And there's a comfort and a convenience and a kind of ease that comes with being on the inside all the time, within the walls, and being at the table day after day. You come to take it for granted, and you treat it then as a small thing, as a pitiful thing. But you spend time out in the wilderness, and suddenly, when you're brought back to the table, there's a great reverence and a great respect then for what you took for granted previously, right?
Yeah, you come back changed,
And
right?
right, you come back changed. And I think we forget that because, again, we're so desperate to maintain control and not let things get out of control. But my problem is every sermon that I preach is about the wild God and the wild dove that descends. And so I can't then reverse course my preaching and say, well, yeah, I'm quoting the Bible about God is wild, not feral, but wild. And he will not allow himself to be domesticated by us and maintained and controlled by us. And that's what makes him good, right? He's not safe, but he is good. And then I can't, as a pastor, turn around and say, well, but I have to make sure that you're safe, meaning under my control. In the guardrails have to be kept up at all times. Whereas like, no,
And
there's no guardrail.
not only for you and for them, but like for
Yeah.
the congregation itself. Like
Yeah.
we can't go out into the wilderness. We have to stay in the comfy confines of.
Get in the sheepfold. I'll be up in the hills hiding from the wolves, but you stay in the sheepfold and obey the rules, and the wolf won't jump the fence and eat you. Everything will be fine. But no.
Well, if you
that's
put
not
it
how
that way,
Right, exactly. But it's, again, human nature. Why? Because I don't want to leave the garden. Because it's safe in here. There's walls.
well, and we don't want to discount the fact that God gave Abraham a hard word,
He did.
and
But he
that
gives
Abraham
each
believed
of us
it.
that hard word in our baptism. Today
I
you're
think
dead.
so. Yeah, I
Today
think
you
so.
die. Which day? Today. Well, what about tomorrow? There is no such thing as tomorrow.
So
There's
go
just
forth
today.
to your death, and you will
Yeah.
live. Like,
Exactly.
oh,
Yes, exactly.
that sounds real
In
pleasant.
your death, there's
Thank you.
life. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry, we'll back up. It was in the early morning. Abraham arose betimes and embraced Sarah, the bride of his old age. And Sarah kissed Isaac, who had taken shame from her. Isaac, her pride, her hope for all coming generations. Then the twain rode silently along their way, and Abraham's glance was fastened on the ground before him, until on the fourth day, when he lifted up his eyes and beheld Mount Moriah in the distance. But then his eyes sought the ground. Without a word, he put the faggots in order and bound Isaac, and without a word, he unsheathed his knife. Then he beheld the ram God had chosen and sacrificed him and wended his way home. From that day on, Abraham grew old. He could not forget that God had required this of him. Isaac flourished as before, but Abraham's eyes darkened. He saw happiness no more. When the child is grown and is to be weaned, his mother will, in maidenly fashion, conceal her breast. Then the child has a mother no longer. So, in number one, it was to conceal the
blackness.
appeal of breast,
yeah.
and now it's just to cover it up altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Happy the child who lost not his mother in any other sense.
Because
And so he says the child has
the
a-
gentle
a-
way. Yeah, the gentle
Yeah.
way.
She conceals her breast to say the child has a mother no longer. Happy the child who lost not his mother in any other sense. Mm. So then it was early in the morning, number 3. Abraham arose betimes, kissed Sarah, the young mother. So it is interesting then, like he says, right, is that when Abraham did that, he became old. That's when he became old. Which, by the way, if you're a parent, that's
Yeah.
when you
That's
become
going to age.
old.
Well, yes, I've had a wedding, as an example,
Yes.
and
Yes,
it
exactly.
does
Yeah.
really turn,
Yeah.
and I've a few more. I have at least another one lined up, and it's like,
Right.
well, especially a daughter, it's devastating, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, again, 1883, the father says to his daughter, he says, every time you kill a man, you become less a man and more an animal. And so essentially he's like saying, like, let me kill. Don't kill because you hate the world's broken your heart. Let me hate the world for you. Let me kill for you, because
Yeah.
you need to stay a woman. You can't become like me. I'm more animal than man at this point, and I don't want you to become me. And in the same way, then, as a parent, every time your child is affected by death
Mm-hmm.
and by the world, and you become less, well, you become less young. You lose your youth in becoming a parent, and you become old.
Yeah, and I
there's-
think
and
we've
you
seen
don't know
this.
that until after you become a parent. You don't know. It.
I think you're right, we've seen it with people. It's definitely like governor or mayor or president. Definitely, like
Yeah,
they come
right, how
out
they age.
really. Yeah,
Yeah.
we've seen this with like the Lincoln pictures, or even Obama
Yeah.
had that too, right?
Yeah.
He came out all gray.
Yeah.
He was just 4 years, and it's like, whoa. So I
Mhm.
mean, even though we don't really necessarily hold them in as high respect as maybe we did in days of old, it's still
Yeah.
true that the demands of the office are weighty.
Correct.
And it ages you, and it actually it's
Yeah.
putting you to death is what it's doing.
Yeah.
Then is what you're saying,
Right.
and it's
Right.
evident even in the demeanor, the face, the
Mhm.
hair, and the face mask now that you have to wear.
I don't think we appreciate. I was going back and forth with somebody I know on Instagram last night because we were talking about, virtue, and how virtue has been pushed out of the public dialogue, and virtue is essentially about self-sacrifice, not service. That's what
Yeah.
virtue is. And that the logos, the foundation of reality established by the logos is you will sacrifice yourself for others as I sacrifice myself for you. That's the nature of reality.
Hmm.
So the rebellion of sin literally is, I will sacrifice others, will not sacrifice myself for them. This is why
Yeah.
Jesus says, right? Love your enemies, and by doing this, you pour hot coals of judgment upon them. The nature of reality, it's not a Christian teaching, self-sacrifice. You'll find it in
Hmm.
all religions. You'll find it
No,
in all
sure.
wisdom. Again, the Stoics emphasize self-sacrifice.
I was going
and
to
they're
say that. I
pagans.
mean, the Greeks on vice and virtue. That's exactly what they
Correct.
teach. Is that
It's
virtue? That
the-
vice is
it's-
self-centered, and virtue is other-centered.
It's charity. Charity is sacrifice.
Hmm.
And so literally the foundation of reality, then the logos, Jesus, the word of God, has established from the very beginning, the foundation of the world. This is the Lamb of God. So then you as a Christian confess this reality and live in it by faith. And those who are outside of Christ try to deny it as much as possible. This is why, as Christians, we have to condemn other Christians who are okay with the sacrifice of others, but not themselves. Christians who say, well, I'm comfortable with them being sacrificed for me or sacrificing for me, but I'm not going to do it. You have to criticize them because you're in rebellion against reality. Because you're saying, I'm not going to die for that. It's like, well, no,
Yeah.
you don't have a choice. You don't understand. You don't have a choice. This is why we rebel. It's not a matter of if you're a Christian, then you can sacrifice yourself in a Jesus kind of way and follow his example. It's every single thing that lives is going to sacrifice itself for something else. Everything.
They can't
Birds,
help but
bugs,
can either
trees.
either be conformed to that reality or rebel against it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so you don't have a choice. And in that is, but also then in self-sacrifice, every time you do make that for others, when you sacrifice yourself for others, there's a diminishment of you. There's a decrease of you because there's less of you.
Right.
It's
And what's
like,
that going to cause in you?
yeah.
That's going to cause a crisis of like, if you're looking, if you think like self-identity is the point, then
Right.
now you're going to be in a crisis situation if you're living for others. There was somebody talking about this. Was it on maybe a Tucker episode or something? He was talking about how like he worked hard. You know, he had a lot of advantages,
Yeah.
but he made a lot of money, and then he was like, now I just want more, and it's not working. So he just started giving it away.
Yeah.
And in the giving away is like I learned who
Oh,
I
it
actually
was
was.
Mr. Beast.
I think he's talked about it too, with the water project. Right?
I just watched the clip yesterday of Mr. Beast saying, like, I tried to go, off the rails for a minute, bought the car, bought the clothes. He said, ironically, when I decided to give it all away, my house got robbed and someone stole all of it anyway. And he's like, I just took that as a sign I was supposed to give it up. You're like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so you end up finding yourself in giving to the other rather than in keeping for oneself. Yeah.
Here's what's interesting. So Sitting Bull, before the Battle of the Little Bighorn, or Greasy Grass, as they called it, it was a tradition for the Dakota. He's a Teton Dakota Indian, and he was their shaman as well as their leader. But cut yourself. So you cut yourself 100 times. You cut pieces of your flesh off.
Whoa.
So he cut 100 pieces of his shoulders and his back off, like little chunks. Because in the pain of the suffering of cutting yourself to pieces for your people, you receive visions. So what you do then is, as you're cutting pieces of yourself off, you stare at the sun, and you keep doing it until you receive a vision. And the vision he beheld then, when he did that, was he saw the U.S. cavalry fall out of the sky to the ground, like falling to the ground. And that's why he knew he was going, like, because Crazy Horse led the attack and then Sitting Bull arranged it, organized it because he was very old. But that's when Sitting Bull said, we're going to win. We can do this. Go ahead and do it. It doesn't matter what their numbers are. We'll win. But I bring that up because, like I said, even pagans, even like people that don't know Christ, there's something there by nature that we grasp, that like there has to be blood, there has to be pain, and that through that there comes a knowledge, a vision of what is, right? What is going to happen, what's going to take place.
So this is an interesting coincidence. So the woman we were talking about before with the Dolores Passion, her visions she received as she was being visited by a stigmatist. So somebody was inflicting Christ's wounds on her, and that's when she had the visions.
Yeah, there you go.
And you're like, well, that's weird. And you're like, well, yes, it is weird. I get that.
To us, it's weird. To us, it's weird, but not to them.
That there would be a person that goes around inflicting Christ's wounds on people, then they have visions. Yes.
That's interesting. There's a movie I have in my queue from A24 Studios. It's the lead is from Rings of Power, where she plays a young convert nun who starts to experience these things.
Mm.
And it kind of goes into psychological thriller area, but it's the same thing. I wonder if it's even based on loosely.
Do you know what the movie's called?
A24. I'd have to look it up real quick, but it's to the point that there is something inherent that we all know, pain and blood and visions are somehow tied together. There's something about heaven or heavenly things or spiritual things that come through pain and through blood. Which, like I said, in Girard, then he's saying, like, this isn't alien to Abraham, what's happening. It's alien to us, because we've essentially said, this is anathema. We can't even have this conversation in our culture.
Well, yeah, but not to our tradition, because we speak of the theology of the cross, right? Being a theologian of the cross. Is that through the cross?
As an idea, Christopher, as an idea.
Oh, no, I actually talk to people about the actual crosses that they bear.
You and I, yes, but you've been seminary. You know how it's presented.
Okay.
It's presented as a romantic, Don Quixote charging windmills kind of thing.
Mm. Yeah, but that doesn't
don't
last
you want
very
to be
long
at the cross?
when you
Have you
actually
been
meet
punched in the face lately?
people who are suffering in their body.
Yes.
Right.
That's my point.
Or spiritual distress.
Being a
or
theologian of
whatever.
the cross is awesome until you're actually being made into one.
Yeah, and we've gone through it personally too.
Then it's horrific. And you're like, Lord, take this cross from my shoulders. I'll take the small or the, it's like, I'll take this one.
I was thinking about, when we had our miscarriage during Holy Week and just the way that that was, it was like the epitome of why I needed Easter. I mean, for me,
Right.
it was like a very powerful, it was like a vision, really, to say, this is why I need the resurrection, is for this.
Oh, by the
for
way,
this death.
since you brought it up, and I wrote about it about a month ago, pastors, please have funerals for women who have had miscarriages.
Yeah, and I think, what was I going to say? Oh, I noticed a local funeral home has started to offer that more. I think you can ask for it. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a
good for him.
money opportunity for them.
Oh, there is
so.
that too. Yeah, sure.
I mean,
both
I
ends.
hate to be so
Yeah.
cynical, but
Yeah.
we have a section for infants, but I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
in our cemetery, but
anyways, yes, please, for the love of
even
stop.
if you don't have remains, if they were discharged at some
Yeah.
point and you didn't,
Doesn't
capture it.
matter. The word spoke. The word created life. Life was taken by sin and death by the world.
Are you going
It
to set
doesn't
some
negate
limits
the
here,
life.
like 8 weeks, 10 weeks?
No, no, I'm not.
No. So we.
Ask anyone who's had a miscarriage if there's a cutoff.
What about naming the child? Do you think so?
Sure,
Yeah.
if it helps. Why not?
Yeah, if it helps.
The
If it
life.
helps, I think so.
If it's if you're
Or
so
you-
moved. But again, like I said,
For me,
ask
it was
any
child
woman-
was enough.
yeah, sure. But ask any woman who's had a miscarriage if there's a what do you call that? A statute of limitations on when they felt something for the child. Right. Like, no. So stop referring to the child as an it, first of all. And again, even if it's, pre-gender, then refer to the child as what it is, a child. What the child is. It's a child. And you can have a funeral for that child. And Luther has a great essay on for women who have had miscarriages. Great essay, actually. It's very helpful. But there's absolutely no reason for us as Christians to accept a worldly definition of what a fetus is or isn't, or what life is or isn't, when the Bible is very clear that it's
this is a child whom the Lord promises resurrection.
correct. He created this child. He didn't create this. Yeah, he didn't create this child to be like, ha, how do you like that? I'm like, no, that's disgusting. Or just, we don't know it's a mystery. Shut up. Just shut up with that talk. It's not a mystery. Christ. It's all about Christ, right? He died to redeem that too. His blood covers that child too. So
Well, and then
have a
you
funeral.
have, like with the Tower of Siloam and whatnot, is that
Yeah,
the glory
right.
of God would be revealed. Well, how's it going to
Yeah.
be revealed if you're not hearing the word proclaimed?
yes, we're not going to talk about that event anymore. We're just going to
Yeah.
push that away. Then if you have multiple miscarriages,
Sometimes in a row. Yeah.
but culturally we don't minister to the mother or the father. We just like, oh, you had a miscarriage. Sorry. Oh, that's really bad. Yeah, let's pray. And move on and forget about it.
No, I
because,
think it's worse. I think it's worse than that. It's done. It's all secret. It's not public.
for sure.
People were really uncomfortable with me talking about it publicly.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
well, why? I mean, we had already
Spirit
announced
of
them that we're
oppression.
pregnant. But see, that's why we don't announce pregnancy until after first
Exactly.
trimester.
Yeah, because we're afraid.
We're afraid.
Yeah.
Fear and trembling.
Don't have to
man.
be. We have Christ. Christ is death. Christ overcame death through his death. Christ is the death of death. I'm the resurrection and the life. Not the resurrection and the life of certain people, but not all people. Ugh. Gross. So number 3 then, he got up, kissed Sarah. Sarah kissed Isaac, her joy, her delight for all times. And they rode away. Abraham lost in thought, thinking of Hagar and his son, whom he had driven out into the wilderness. And now he ascends Mount Moriah and draws his knife. It was a calm evening when Abraham rode out alone, and he rode to Mount Moriah. There he cast himself down on his face and prayed to God to forgive him his sin in that he had been about to sacrifice his son Isaac. Interesting. And in that the father had forgotten his duty toward his son. And yet oftener he rode on his lonely way, but he found no rest. He could not grasp that it was a sin that he had wanted to sacrifice to God, his most precious possession, him for whom he would most gladly have died many times. But if it was a sin, if he had not loved Isaac, thus, then could he not grasp the possibility that he could be forgiven? For what sin more terrible? When the child is to be weaned, the mother is not without sorrow that she and her child are to be separated more and more, that the child who had first lain under her heart, and afterward at any rate rested on at her breast, is to be so near to her no more. So they sorrow together for that brief while. Happy he kept his child so near to him, and needed not to sorrow more.
This is really an interesting approach, isn't it?
Treating
Just
it like a diamond.
Yeah, looking at all the
Right.
facets. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's, I mean, and so he treats, I think he's treating the story of Scripture as as possibility, not as dogmatic, assertion,
Yeah.
and that it can be heard in different ways. Now we've confessed this law and gospel, right? It can be heard both as law and gospel,
right.
properly distinguished, right?
Yeah.
But
Well, Luther says that Abraham uses God's own word against God, and we should too. Meaning Abraham uses God's earlier promise that through all the nations
hold God
of the
to
earth
his
will be
promise.
blessed.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
So Abraham, when Abraham says to Isaac, God will provide a sacrifice, Luther says, yeah, because Abraham's saying to God, you can't kill him, because then your promise would be a lie.
I think part of the other thing that resonates here, or at least it's remarkable, is the way that Kierkegaard is bringing out, like, just what's going on in their head. What are they thinking about?
Yeah. Well, he's also
what are they
considered the OG of modern psychology.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
But like, what's the thought process? What's the faith process? I guess I don't know what you want to call that. I mean, just like, how do they think of God? How do they think of each other? How's the relationship changing? What is this going to do for them
in relation to God and Sarah and Isaac?
Yeah, exactly. And that, like you said, facets of a diamond. That I like that. Kind of just keep turning it and saying, well, how about that? How about that?
Yeah.
How about that? Right. And what we usually want to say is, like, especially like with something like a parable. This isn't a parable. This is real history. But it's like, well, here's what the oil in the lamps is: faith. Right. Dogmatically.
Right.
I'm like, well, yeah. Or. If it's describing the kingdom has a multiplicity in its unity, right?
Yeah.
So, excuse me.
No, it's an interesting thing because he's essentially saying here, well, Abraham sees this as a sin, not an act of faith.
Well, we do.
That he's killing his son, that he won't protect his son from God, which is interesting to juxtapose that. I confess my coveting of my children as my sin, that I would kill God before I would kill my own child. So I guess in the verse, if God asked me to kill my child, I'd say you first.
Right.
You go first.
That's why it resonates. It's like, I can see that as a possibility too.
I was thinking about this this morning, and you brought it up in relation to fatherhood, and then we're reading about it. So there's the divine foxiness. I was in Costco yesterday with my wife against my will, and I did it because I love her, and it's my obligation to protect and defend her. And she asked me to go because she doesn't.
You
feel
didn't
safe
go
in
into like
certain
your
places.
zen state and just kind of.
I refused to speak English. I was speaking Spanish.
Didn't just flow through the aisles.
I did actually. I was pushing the cart. I was I was in control of the ship. And then we were at the Mexican grocery, which I love because I'm very at ease.
I saw your baguettes or whatever.
That's right,
Whatever
panaderia.
the Mexican version of it is.
Yeah, the pan dulces. But I was thinking about it in this term. So I'm standing in Costco. There's hundreds of people in this store. Like it was overwhelming. And I looked around and I realized there was not a single man in eye shot could defeat me in a fight. They were not physically capable of protecting or defending their families.
Nope.
If I had them. And I don't mean that in the sense of like, I looked at them and judged them to be lacking. I'm like, I'm watching them walk. Do you know how many people in Costco wear knee braces? It's amazing that people go shopping and they have to wear knee braces to walk around Costco. Because I've seen it at Disneyland, for example. Like it's a thing. Like people will film at Disneyland. Like, look at all the people wearing knee braces because they can't walk. But I saw it at Costco. There's men and women wearing, and these are people younger than me, wearing knee braces to walk around in Costco. And you realize how physically deficient, in this case, men and fathers are in particular, that they can't defend their own family against attack. Whereas my wife's like, I need you to go with me because I need to feel safe because it's busy, it's crowded, it's in a part of the city that's not safe, and I need you to go with me. And of course, I'll go with you. But she knows I can protect her. And at the very least, I will die in order for her to escape, right? Because that's the way it goes. It's not even a conversation. That's just the way it is. And so likewise, then, if you can't even protect your own family from the physical threats around you, how can you protect your family spiritually?
Right.
From the devil. And
we've talked about that.
What
like
Abraham's lamenting.
You know, I mean, it's fathers, it's spiritual fathers too. Like a pastor who can't show up because he's not well. You know, I mean, that if it's due to his own neglect, I suppose. I mean, there may be a distinction that needs to be made there, if there is such a distinction. But
I don't think there is. There isn't. You need to learn how to handle yourself. There's different ways that you can go about doing that. There's not just one way, but there's different ways. Just self-confidence itself is a great deterrent.
Oh, whether it's with the fist or with some other device, I suppose. Yeah.
Right. When I'm out in public, I don't threaten people. I just hit people. That's enough. For most people, it's enough that I just look at them and let them know with my body language and my facial expression. No, we're not doing this.
Yeah,
we're not.
So that's posture, right?
It's everything, exactly. And but it should be the same way in church. I want people to come to church to know that I, as their pastor, will protect them, no matter what. I want more than anything that when parents come into church, they know that I will protect their children, even if they can't, or even if they can. Like most of the men in my church, blessedly, I look at the men in my church and go, yeah, the reason you're in church with your family is because you can take care of your family. I can see that. So how do I walk with you to let you know as a father, you can relax in this church because you know your pastor can handle his business too. And he'll protect your children, not just spiritually, but all the way around. Like I'll take care of their children, right? I'll feed them if they're hungry, if they're thirsty, if they're acting up, I'll come and sit with them, right? Like you're present. Like there's a presence to that. And Abraham is the way Kierkegaard spins it out is Abraham saying like, that's I'm supposed to do that. I can do that, but I'm not doing that. That's my sin. I'm not going to protect you from God. And I don't know. I think there's a nobility in that, actually. I know it's sinful to say, because it is coveting, but I think there's nobility to say, like, I'll fight God for you. Like, I'll do that. Like I've said before, I actually think that it is love to say to someone else, you go to church and I'll take care of your kids. You go to the sacrament, you go take care of your kids. And ultimately to say, listen, if it's between me and you, you get on the ark. You get on the ark. You take my spot. I mean, because isn't that what Jesus does ultimately? He faces abandonment by God to save us.
Right. Well, I mean, he faced up the gates of hell too. I mean,
right. So again, not very witty or whimsical.
But
I
mean, as the psalmist says, you did not abandon my soul to Sheol. What is that? Psalm 16, I think.
Right.
You know, so, but he does go to Sheol for us.
He does.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's a trope of pagan myth, into the underworld to save your love, right? Well, where do they get that from? It's all downstream of the one who does it for real. And so you as a Christian, especially you as a Christian man, why won't you go into hell to save your love? Why aren't you willing to do that and to say, like, I trust so much in God's grace, I'm willing to take God to
Well,
let you
yeah,
get
because
away.
there's the double reception. It
Yeah,
can be as an example that's encouraging, right? And you say, I
right.
want to be like that. I'm gonna
Yeah,
strive to do that. Or it can
yep,
be entirely discouraging. Like I can't ever stack up to that. I can't be Pastor
yeah,
Riley in the way that he defends his family. And I've
right.
received that, right? It's like my
Yeah,
family is an indictment against some people, and it's an encouragement for
mm-hmm.
others. And you're like, how is that
Correct.
possible? It's like, well, because they're well behaved and they listen to God's word and they come to church and it's like,
Yeah,
well, how is that an indictment against you? Well,
right.
because my kids
Mirror
don't
of the
and they
law.
won't and I can't.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the mirror.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So, and that's always the problem with example, isn't it? Is that it works both directions.
well, it's also the fact that in the past, maybe it was like a hand mirror that was
Hmm.
held up, like a little mirror, right? A little compact even. Now, our entire culture is so soft
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The
that's
contrast
that,
is much more dramatic.
yeah,
That's right.
it's like the size of an IMAX screen, the mirror. It's so large that even the smallest, as you would note, 100 years ago, what you're doing would have been normal. It would
Oh,
have been
actually,
ordinary, boring.
we would have been kind of the least well
Sure.
behaved of the
Right,
congregation.
exactly. You would have been
Yeah.
like, "Hey kids, can you really tame it down?" Yeah.
Yeah, you're really
Um,
making, it's bringing shame on our family here.
Whereas now it's tilted so far the other way that even the smallest, like, "Oh, your kids come to church with you?" That's crazy. It's like
Yeah.
that's nothing. That's a crumb of piety, and yet that's now seen as like a radical thing. Like that's where we're at, and I don't think people want to confront that because, like you said, it's a mirror, or I said it's a mirror, but they don't
Hmm.
want to confront it because the mirror is like you're not on the right end of this table. You're not sitting
Right.
at the right end of the
But
table.
with his example of Abraham, it's like, well, the response is to confess,
Yes,
to say, and forgive me,
in the
right?
direction of the gospel. Yes,
Right. Forgive me
right.
and create me a clean heart. Restore me and
Because here's the
restore
thing:
those who I've
when you
neglected.
confess, I'm going to pull my chair out and say, "Take my place."
Hmm.
That's gospel. That's gospel. Like when you confess in the direction of the gospel, they respond to be like, "You take my place." If it's the law, it's like, "Ew, get away from the table. You don't belong
Hmm.
here."
Yeah.
Again, like I said, right? Jesus talks to these Pharisees at this dinner party and says, then he turned around and addressed the crowd that followed him. You're like, wait, you were there the whole time, just standing there watching them eat? Yes.
Yeah. They're not
Like that.
invited to the table. They have to stand
That's
right
even more
outside.
convicting. What they then the whole conversation is even more convicting because there's a crowd of people who are told you don't deserve to be inside the house.
Well, and just the idea that a Pharisee's meal is like a spectacle sport,
Yes.
it's pretty
Yes.
incredible.
It's so crazy. You're like, ooh, yeah, that strikes. So I think this is what Kierkegaard is driving at, though, too, is he's bringing out human emotion. He's bringing out the psychology of it. And he's saying, like, there's so much we could meditate on. And whether you agree or disagree with how he's exegeting this, he's saying this isn't an idea. This isn't just something, again, we sit around at a cafe or the salon and over cappuccinos, we discuss how romantic the sacrifice of Isaac is. He's like, no, let's, like, because
But
again,
if you've given up your
Kierkegaard
children,
went
in a
through this.
sense, yeah,
Yeah.
if you've sacrificed your children to something,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe not to God, but to something, that's to be confessed and
Right.
forgiven. If you want, and if there's going to be any change, if there's going to be any
Right.
restoration, if or a different
Well,
path.
since he was what 5, his father died when he was like 5, or maybe that was
Okay.
Nietzsche, because Nietzsche went through almost the exact same thing as Kierkegaard. No, maybe he was a little bit older, but anyways, Kierkegaard, his father dies when he's young and raised by his mother and so on, raised by his sister. Like he grew up with only one father, his heavenly father. The specter, the ghost of his father, overshadowed
His father
his
died
entire
in
life.
1834.
Okay.
So when he was 22, no,
Okay, so
21.
he was mature then when his father died, but
Um,
it still deeply affected him because his father was very pietistic, very strong personality. Yeah, and so
It's
Nietzsche's
interesting. It's
father died when he was
interesting that
5.
his father married the maid of the household, and then
That's it.
Kierkegaard had the
Yes.
affair with the maid of his household.
Yes.
Of
There
that,
we go.
it's like
Yes.
father, like son. Wow,
I
isn't
think
that interesting?
yes, you know what? I'm confusing both the two biographies. Nietzsche in love with his cousin and Kierkegaard having, a relationship with him. Okay, there we go. Sorry, that's my fault, folks. I apologize. But when you repent in the direction of the God, then it has always come to the higher seat. It's never
Yeah,
get away from the table. It's not here's some crumbs, be happy with that. Right? But what are you losing coming to the head of the table? Well, you're going to lose your earthly anchorage.
right. And any kind of like, what excuses? I mean, it could be pride, but it
Hmm.
could just be an excuse. Like, well, I just had to. It just that's how it had to be. or don't you
Yeah.
know kids these days, or that kind of thing.
Right.
It's
Right.
just, I mean, I know it sounds lame, but that's what actually people say. They're like,
Yep.
well,
It
that's just
is.
how they behave these days, and you're like, you gave them over to the teaching of
To be,
demons,
to be raised, to be
to be
mentored by their peer
devoured,
group. Yeah.
yeah, to be devoured
Yeah.
by the world. Like,
When you're mentored by adults, you actually grow up to be a pretty good adult, all things considered. When you're
hmm.
mentored by people your own age, crazy stuff happens.
I know. Yeah, we've talked about this. Is that the lack of like multi-age, because we don't have
Hmm.
Sunday school anymore, so the children come to
Mm.
Bible class,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it does condition a little bit of what you say and how you say it.
Hmm.
Probably not in an unhelpful way. I try not
Sure.
to refrain from being crude and whatnot,
Right.
crude joking,
Right.
but it also then allows the children to hear the kind of conversation that you have
Yes.
as a mature Christian, with your
Correct.
pastor. So there's all sorts of advantages to it. It's not the
Right.
only thing, but anyway.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So finally, number 4, it was in the early morning. All was ready for the journey in the house of Abraham. He bade farewell to Sarah, and Eliezer, his faithful servant, accompanied him along the way for a little while. They rode together in peace, Abraham and Isaac, until they came to Mount Moriah. And Abraham prepared everything for the sacrifice, calmly and mildly. But when his father turned aside in order to unsheath the knife, Isaac saw that Abraham's left hand was knit in despair, and that a trembling shook his frame. But Abraham drew forth the knife. Then they returned home again, and Sarah hastened to meet them. But Isaac had lost his faith. No one in all the world ever said a word about this, nor did Isaac speak to any man concerning what he had seen, and Abraham suspected not that anyone had seen it. When the child is to be weaned, his mother had the stronger food ready, lest the child perish. Happy he who has in readiness this stronger food. Thus, and in many similar ways, thought the man whom I have mentioned about this event. And every time he returned after a pilgrimage to Mount Moriah, he sank down in weariness, folding his hands and saying, "No one, in truth, was great as was Abraham, and who can understand him?"
Okay.
Every time he returned. So he's saying this isn't one event from different facets. He's saying every time he returned after a pilgrimage to Moriah, he sank down.
You know what I just thought of?
Mhm.
That I mentioned this maybe an episode or two ago. Like it seems like the only sci-fi they can write right now is like metaverse, multiple timeline kind of stuff.
Right, exactly. Yep.
That's exactly what he's doing here.
Yeah, right. Right.
It's like which way, Abraham? Which
Right.
course?
It's the meme that John Wick is an alternate timeline for Bill and Ted, where
What?
Ted's dad sent him to military school. Remember, he said, if you fell out of school, I'm going to send you to military school. And so John Wick is an alternate timeline where he failed out of school and was sent to military school. So that was the result.
Oh man, it's the same
Yeah.
universe. That's weird.
Yeah. So now go back to what we read at the preface, which is you're walking away from this and you're walking towards something. Do you know what you're walking away from? Do you know what you're going toward? And then he chooses this text of Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac to illustrate his original point.
Well, because as
Yeah.
in terms of ideas,
Yeah.
there's a diversity of potential ideas. He hasn't even exhausted everything that you could possibly
Yeah.
hear here.
Right.
But it's not about ideas. It's about well, he uses the metaphor of the weaning, right?
Right.
And he had the 4 different kind of ways that the child is weaned and how it's received differently, but it's all for the benefit
Right.
of the child.
Right. So going back then to preparation, we'll start from the beginning to sum it up. There lived a man who, when a child, had heard the beautiful Bible story of how God tempted Abraham and how he stood the test, how he maintained his faith, and against his expectations received his son back in. As this man grew older, he read this same story with ever greater admiration. For now life had separated what had been united in the reverent simplicity of the child. And the older he grew, the more frequently his thoughts reverted to that story. His enthusiasm waxed stronger and stronger, and yet the story grew less and less clear to him. Finally, he forgot everything else in thinking about it, and his soul contained but one wish, which was to behold Abraham, and but one longing, which was to have been a witness to that event. His desire was not to see the beautiful lands of the Orient, and not the splendor of the promised land, and not the reverent couple whose old age the Lord had blessed with children, and not the venerable figure of the aged patriarch, and not the God-given vigorous youth of Isaac. It would have been the same to him if the event had come to pass on some barren heath. But his wish was to have been with Abraham on the 3 days' journey, when he rode with sorrow before him, his eyes. Oh, he rode with sorrow before him, and eyes at his side. His wish was to have been present at the moment when Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw Mount Moriah afar off. To have been present at the moment when Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw Mount Moriah afar off. To have been present at the moment when he left his asses behind and wended his way up to the mountain alone with Isaac. For the mind of this man was busy, not with the delicate conceits of the imagination, but rather with his shuddering thought. The man we speak of was no thinker. He felt no desire to go beyond his faith. It seemed to him the most glorious fate to be remembered as the father of faith, and a lot to be possessed of that faith, even if no one knew it. The man we speak of was no learned exegetist. He did not even understand Hebrew. Who knows, but a knowledge of Hebrew might have helped him to understand readily both the story and Abraham.
He's talking about himself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because at this point he would have been, this was 46, he would have been 33 at this point, I guess.
Something like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
that, yeah, I left that off because it's nice to come back around to it.
I think so. I wondered where you went and why you did that. And I think
Yeah.
it is helpful. You're right. And this is something that we forget because we're professional theologians. I don't know. Maybe you don't, but I do. Is that not everyone hears the story the same way, and they
Right.
and I know we know this is in our preaching, is that each year we don't preach it the same way, that we don't latch onto the same details that we.
Right.
And what I like about the way he treated it with the 4 kind of retellings is that none of them were accurate to the scripture as far as the details
Right.
go.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, well, wait a minute, where were the servants? But then the 4th one, he had there's Eleazar, he's with them. Okay. And but notice what he left out in all of them.
Jesus.
Right. There's no
ram.
ram. There's no ram.
Yeah.
There's no caught in the thicket. There's no sacrifice.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Right. And maybe he comes back to that, but that is to actually miss the whole story. Like the story is just, then what is it? It's terrible and awe-inspiring and whatever, but it's not redeeming. It's not salvific.
Yeah.
There's no, but this is the way that our meditations go as we're considering things. If we're willing to let our imagination run a little bit, right? It's like, well, what was going through? What was he thinking? And especially that story. I mean, it's so profound. And you can say, well, it's a picture of Christ in the church, or Christ, God the Father and the Son. Okay, that's fine, except it really happened. And, what was Abraham thinking? I mean, this is really, I always ask that question. What were you thinking? How could you do this? And, and so he's meditating on that. And I think and our people do this too, if we let them. It's like, okay, let's, enjoy the text, play with it, because it is the story, but it is a story too.
Well, I'd say this, and you have the same experience. This happened again Wednesday morning. Left to themselves, our people become Baptists.
There's like
That's
meaning,
how they tend.
right?
There's a meaning, and it's about my life and how I'm supposed to live it. I can go to when I die.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Pastor, you said it this way, but last year you said it this way. Yep, that's true.
Right. Only the folks who attend regular Bible class, meaning my boomers, they're the only ones who, from just 16 years of being beaten to death with it, constantly, will say, it's not about me, it's not about me, it's about Jesus and what he does for us. And then they'll ask me to lead them through the text to find Jesus in the text, right? But otherwise, they'll come occasionally, like during the year when we have Sunday school, the parents then drop the kids off at Sunday school and they come up to Bible class. They have the questions. They're the ones who have the questions because they're not dialed into that. And they've had Sunday school confirmation and a life of being told, well, when you read the Bible, the whole reason you read the Bible is to find out rules for life, basic instructions before leaving earth. It's all this revivalist, Baptistic, Methodistic theology that comes out because that's the old Adam in a nutshell.
Yeah.
The Adam's a Buddhist. Tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Right. And that's what he's actually criticizing. And he's doing that
Yes.
through the way that he's telling the story. Because he eventually, I'm scanned way ahead. He does get there.
Yeah.
He doesn't mention the sacrifice, but he does mention, because the thrust of this is like, you people, the bishops of our church don't even have faith.
Correct.
And so they're not even they don't even trust in the way that Isaac did.
Yeah.
But he does say that God will provide the sacrifice, and he latches onto that word from Abraham as a testimony of what he believed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that God was tempting him. God tempts no one, but God tempted Abraham. Yeah, but I'm not seeing the ram. I'd have to keep going, probably.
Well, there's the preliminary expectoration, for example.
That's where I'm
he gets
getting to.
into yeah, he gets deep into Jesus in this section. This is available online free, by the way, on Gutenberg.org. We'll
I linked to it in the show notes, so you
post
can
a link so you
it'll
can
be
read
there.
this at your leisure. Because that section where he digs deep, it's long. It's not going up like what we just read.
Oh yeah, this just keeps going and going and going.
Yeah.
It brings in Orpheus. That's cool too.
Well, he was a superior intellect. He would write 12 or 13 things at one time. He had standing desks all throughout his house. And so
Really?
he'd be working on multiple manuscripts, and he would walk from manuscript to manuscript like Bobby Fischer playing chess or something, and just be constantly working on different things at the same time.
Oh, then he gets into the criticism of the way that people preach Abraham. Oh man.
Well, guess we're going to have to read this next week now.
Maybe, I don't know. He who is to preach the sermon may sleep comfortably until a quarter of an hour before he has to preach it, and the listener may comfortably sleep during the sermon, for everything is made easy enough without much exertion, either to the preacher or listener. What a great line. I had somebody lament this to me the other day. It's like, I can never hear the sermon because the kids are always misbehaving or whatever. They're causing noise. I'm distracted. And then every once in a while I get to hear a sermon, and they're usually the worst ones. They're just boring.
Thanks, I think.
I know. I was like, well, not every week's going to be a strike, It's gonna
Right.
So,
Interesting.
yeah. It's very interesting where he goes with it. He's like, the
Yeah.
problem with the way that people preach it is they make it too easy. And they miss the fact that it's a trial, and that it's a trial upon us as well.
Yeah.
I don't think we have to come back to it, but read to the end. I'll put the link below.
Right.
That's where he goes. It's
You and I
like,
brought this up actually on Ash Wednesday.
Oh, okay.
Is that people spend too much time as it is focused on death. Need to come to church and hear even more about it, right?
Well,
But-
they're
and
avoiding
we were
death
talking about-
through their whole life, right?
Well, we talked about in the direction of we'll apply the ashes, for example. You're pointing them to their death. And it's like they spend all day thinking about that. Every day, all day is just that constantly. This is why we put them to the font, not to the ash heap. So as pastors, we have to seize the attention and seize the focus of our congregation. Stop focusing on death, focus on Christ. That's where your death is laid to rest. And me putting ashes on your head isn't going to make this better. It's going to relieve the tension. It's not going to relieve that reality.
And the same thing happens on Good Friday, and it's helpful in our resources in the altar book, in the introduction notes. It has this one line that's really, I think, profound. I quote it usually. Good Friday is not a funeral for Jesus.
Yes. Let's stop pretending. Yeah.
So we're always trying to put these. So Ash Wednesday, we try to turn it into a funeral. In the same way at a funeral, you have a casket with a dead body, right? So we're going to put ashes on you so that you're dead. And it's like, well, dead to sin already, but alive to Christ Jesus. I'm alive. Like, put the water on me. Give me resurrection.
Was it Paul Gerhardt? Was that it? Or was it Paul Gerhardt?
Which one?
The plague? Or was it Philip Nicolai?
Nikolai, yeah.
Yeah, it was Nicolai. Ask Philip Nicolai if Good Friday was a good day to have a funeral sermon.
Yeah, we
right?
figured
But
he
you know,
had probably he buried on average
7 to 8
for
a
that.
day.
No, it was 30.
Was it
It
30
was
a day?
30.
7 days
Yeah,
a
because
week? Yeah, that's right. 30 a
it was
day, 7 days a week.
1,500.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. On average, it was 30 days a week.
I just can't even imagine.
Yeah.
You don't have 30 separate funerals. I mean,
No,
it's gonna be.
makes it even worse though. That makes it even worse
It's just like.
because they have to look at 30 caskets, and they're all different sizes, and they're all different people, and some are your family, and some aren't your family.
Well,
So you have to
imagine the
preach same
existential
sermon.
crisis of that. It's like, why them and not me? You know.
Correct. So yeah,
And-
ask Nikolai if Good Friday wasn't a good opportunity to preach the resurrection from death.
Mm.
But it goes
Yeah.
back to the fact that culturally we're so soft, and we've gotten so lazy about what he's essentially criticizing his culture for too, which is you're soft and you're lazy because everything's too easy and convenient, and you're basically being told just show up and believe and you're fine.
Well,
But
and
if
it
you don't show
doesn't.
up, you're still going to heaven.
It doesn't take faith to believe in death.
No, nope. You just have to.
You don't
just
have to
breathe.
preach. You don't have
Yeah.
to preach the death of all things. It's
Right.
self-evident.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere. But we insulate ourselves. Again, read my sermon for this Sunday that I sent you.
Okay.
What we do is we play these games with ourselves. We build cities, we build houses, and we build these places so that we can make a home for our dreams and our memories and death. So that we can hopefully think, oh, I'm in control now. Because again, out there, go back to 1883, it's like I said, you go out in the bushes to go to the bathroom, you get bit by a rattlesnake and you're dead. like that's a reality of life, right? Like don't wander off the path is a reality. Whereas here, you don't have to worry about that unless you live in Australia or something. But
It's just like putting bumper guards on everything, thinking that's
that's what we've done as a society. Every generation put more guardrails.
Uh-huh.
Every generation said, oh, I can't believe parents let me do that. We need to pass a law against that. Wear a helmet. Got to have a helmet. Well, if I don't want to, then we're going to pass a law to force you to wear a helmet. It's like, why can't I choose what I want to do with my life?
Well, it is
To
interesting
everybody.
because we were at a
Well, we saw this in 2020, of course.
we were at a park, and as soon as you go into the park, the children go in every direction and they go to
Correct.
see what are the boundaries, if there are boundaries.
Yes.
They actually test the
Yeah.
boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And can we even go into the lake? They did, right? I mean, it's
Yes.
like, is that a
Yeah.
boundary? No, that's not one either.
Yeah.
You can go right into
Yep.
it,
Yes.
right? How far can you go
Mhm.
up to where the line is, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yep.
But
Rope
the
line,
thing about
buoys.
the park is that it is a wide open space, and then you see
Right.
what life looks like actually.
Yes.
It's not within the cubicle or within the
No, it's messy, chaotic. Things come out
Yeah.
of nowhere. People you can predict show up.
people
Somebody
fall
falls
down
down
and
and-
trip.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
exactly.
Yep. And we don't. It scares us because the mystery of life is revealed to us in the moment. You're not.
Well,
in
and you
control.
encounter strange people walking through the park.
You do.
Right?
Yeah, depending
You
on where
know.
you live, they get
Ooh,
stranger.
that
and
might be
stranger.
uncomfortable. You might have to
Yeah.
talk to somebody about their dog.
Right.
I'm like, well,
Right.
yeah.
That's why I don't like going in Costco.
Costco. Well, but Costco is not a wide open space.
No, I said crossing the border at Tijuana is more peaceful than going to Costco checkout.
Especially in the middle of the day, I
Yes,
guess.
it was
I don't know.
crazy. Yeah, it's
I
crazy.
think Mondays are okay at Costco, maybe. I don't know.
Here it's Tuesday and Wednesday. Thursday
it?
apparently is the day for everybody to go. But I'm like, how
Oh,
are
I
you doing
avoid
that
it at
at
all
work?
costs. I try to avoid that. But I'd rather go to Costco than Meijer. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I understand.
Well, yeah.
Again, the great irony of victory is that we don't really like being around people. We'd rather just stay at home and hide. Or I'd rather sit on my deck and talk to my birds and my
Well,
chicks and my squirrels. And
The Lord pushes us out into the open
that's what he
places.
does. He's like, I told you you're going to sacrifice.
Mhm.
Today's the day. So yeah, the Kierkegaard's a difficult read for sure. But I think, like I said, he is a palate cleanser. He will force you to think.
Oh, and the creativity in the language and then the exploration of the scripture, I mean, is
Yeah.
appealing, even
Yeah.
if we don't necessarily agree with it. And then, like I said, I
Right.
can appreciate the conclusion that most pastors
Mhm.
and hearers don't want to be challenged at all with a text like this.
Right. Right.
And we get, what's the last word? To get out a cheap edition of Abraham and yet forbid everyone to do as he did. That I call ridiculous.
Correct.
We get the cheap
Yeah.
version. We don't get the,
Right.
wow, there's
yeah.
a lot going on here and it's worthy
This
of our
goes
consideration.
the parable we read. We read the parable of the diamond on the lake. That was one of the parables we read.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, it was one of the parables because I wanted to because I talk about it so often. I wanted to read it. We can't repeat the original event. It's too dangerous. People could fall through the ice and die. And eventually it just
yeah.
becomes a fable. We don't even anymore. It becomes a fable. And I think that's what he's driving at, is that the sacrifice of Isaac is a fable. It's a modern fairy tale in the sense that it's not real.
We did the parable of the geese and the king,
Mm-hmm.
or the parable of
Yeah.
the geese, and then the king and the maiden. Those
Oh,
were
okay.
the two that we did,
We didn't do the parable of the ice. I have to read that.
I
next time.
guess. And then we also read. Oh, did we ever do another? We have got Kierkegaard listed here. Oh, we did Judge for Yourself. We did do that.
Okay. For Lent?
It was October 26th of 2020.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, you can imagine what's
That
going
makes
on there.
sense. Yes.
And we did Savonarola. It was like a two-parter.
Savonarola, baby. Yeah.
Preparation
that.
for Christianity, we read as episode number 6. So I guess we've read some Kierkegaard here.
I guess we have.
Episode
Just- yeah,
6,
for some reason,
May
I never
3rd,
remember it.
2018. So it looks like we're on a 2-year cycle with Kierkegaard.
Oh, there we go. That makes sense too. Yeah.
Cleanse the palate about every 2 years.
He's
Okay.
chewy. Yeah. Cool.
Yep.
Well, that's it then, folks. There's your 2-year reintroduction to Kierkegaard. Go check it out. And yeah, who knows what we're going to read next week. I came up with Kierkegaard 30 minutes before we went on air. I was going to read
Oh,
it.
I thought it was
gonna- we should
perfect.
do-
When you said that, I was like, no, that's good.
Yeah. I was like,
That's
well,
good.
we talked about Os Guinness last week. We should read him. And then I read some. I was like, yeah, we're definitely not reading that. We don't need to read Os
It's
Guinness.
hard. It would be hard not to be critical.
There's not a lot of meat on the bone. Yeah. But then I was like, oh, Kierkegaard. Yes, for sure. So yeah, next week, who knows? Another lay theologian pop out of the woodwork.
I don't know. Did we ever do Dostoevsky or something? I think we did one, didn't we?
We did the Gospels for literature last summer.
Okay.
We did the Gospel parables, or
All right.
yeah, Dostoevsky on the Gospel from that book.
That is
We
what
can do
did.
Saze. I haven't done Saze in a minute.
Yeah, but he's not a lay. He's not. We were doing lay people in the summer. Remember?
well,
You
he's a
set
lay
the-
person. He's not an ordained pastor.
Sasa? Yes. he
Kinda,
was.
sorta. I'm just kidding.
That doesn't work.
Once in a while, not all the time. No, there's people. I got people.
Somebody said we should do Melanchthon. I mean, this is a theologian, but not a.
We can go back and read his Romans commentary. We haven't done that,
That
in
might-
a couple
That
of
would
years.
be entertaining.
That's so
for
good. Read
folks.
Romans 6 or 7.
Yeah, exactly.
He's on fire in that one. So yeah, let's do that next week. We'll do Melanchthon next week. Romans
Okay.
commentary.
Lay
1540.
theologian. Perfect.
There we go. All right, folks. Thanks everybody on the live stream. Thanks everybody listening at home. And as always, God bless you. And we'll talk to you soon.
1517.org. I know. France really wants Magdeburg. This has been a request for at least 4 years. So over and
I
over.
know. Every time we get into politics and theology, we get ourselves in trouble, though.
Well, you know what? I just find it a little boring.
What?
Well, because I listened to enough of it outside of our show, and I did have there was a recommendation of somebody who taught. What was it? It's a little short book, but it has like all the scriptures that you might consider as far as resisting authority. I was like, oh, that would be a nice chapter to just kind of pull out. Look at all the times that people in the scriptures with God's authority resisted civil government.
It's quite a lot.
That's quite a lot. Maybe you are not reading Romans 13 the way you should be.
Yes, that's right. I do not think that word means what you think it means.
But now I can't remember what the book was called. I'll have to find it. It was a little short book. Magdeburg.
Yeah.
I know. Well, and resistance theory,
Well,
it's like, well,
remind us around election time. That'd be in November.
Oh,
when
yeah, that would be a
everything's
good
on
time to do
fire.
it.
That'd be a great time to read it.
that would
I'm
be a
just
good time for a
excited.
series.
It's June 21st. We might make it through June without the thing happening. So I'm quite excited by that.
Oh, no. I think we're going to have, what did I think? I think it's going to be the trifecta. We're going to have all three. They're going to throw everything at
You
the
think
wall.
so?
Yeah.
Well,
so we'll have the
Immigrant riots are coming for sure.
Yeah. So we got flu, we got riots. We've got
just saying that
probably
somebody's
World
gonna
War
get bang, bang.
III. Probably.
Yeah,
or
we
at
got
least
to amp that up.
We got to amp that up. Get all the fronts going on that. Because just think about it's the playbook from FDR, right? Everything, and then meanwhile he's basically unable to serve, right?
Right.
He's wheelchair
Right,
bound and he's
exactly.
sickly. And all the things they did,
I just
what do
think
we?
that a certain group of people that occupy a certain strip of land in the Middle East
Oh,
are going to be blamed for a certain attack on American soil and use that as a catalyst to set everything off.
yeah. Or it could be Russia. You know, there could be more Russia
I don't
stuff.
think so. That's
Russia,
played
China.
out. I think it's played out.
Well,
I don't think
I think they
anybody
played.
cares.
I think they played that. The other, the other side, quote unquote. They've played
Yeah.
the game. Did you watch the video of Kim Jong Il or whatever his name is riding in the limo with
Yeah, I saw
Putin?
that. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, what are we watching? It's like it looked like an SNL skit or something, or what?
Yeah.
What was the
Well,
what was
I
the
mean,
guy
just
who
listen to the White House. It's CG. It's all AI.
Oh, it's just
not real.
It's just AI. It's fake.
Yeah, it's
What
all
do they
AI.
call them? Cheap fakes instead of deep fakes.
Yeah,
cheap
they're
fakes.
just cheap
Man,
fakes. That's all it is. None of that's
great
real.
marketing. Great marketing.
It's like,
wow.
you're a couple of years ahead of yourself at this point. You got to slow down your roll.
Well, and I
Save
don't
that for
disagree.
2025.
I don't disagree. That's definitely gonna be more and more the case. That's fine with me. That
I
means
know.
we act
Unfortunately,
trustworthy
there's websites
things-
where you can actually test, though. Like,
Well, I
don't
know.
think
But
again, people that run
but
White
for
House
truly
understand
trustworthy,
works.
like interactions, you're going to have to meet with people in person, and I like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't like meeting with people in person, but I think we need to. So,
Yeah.
you can't kiss your wife virtually, right? So, I mean, you can send the emoticon, but
I don't. There's so many jokes that I can't say. So it's great.
I baited you. I'm sorry.
There. We go. Cool. All right. Well, I'm gonna go have tacos. I'll talk to you again.
Nice. Bye.
Peace.